Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Chris Keulemans. It's an honor to be back at the Astorga Theatre and back at the Central European Forum. The place, according to my experience, where the best people are on stage, in the audience, tackling the most important questions of these times, including this year's edition, because it was an important question in '68 and it's an important question now. Let's demand the impossible. This is what we're going to try to do this afternoon. I cannot see you very well. Maybe we can have a bit more light on the audience, if that's possible. Exactly, that's what I wanted to ask you, but I can even not see the hands. Who's been here yesterday and the day before? Fair number of people. It's been extraordinary. Last night, of course, and today again, I think we'll pick up, exactly, I think we'll pick up on some of the questions and issues that were raised over the past few days. It's going to be an adventure this afternoon. I think this afternoon, between now and around 8 o'clock, is going to be like writing an essay together. Because we have a question: how to demand the impossible. Every essay starts with a question. But you don't know the answer yet. You don't know where you're going with the essay. What we do know is we are facing anti-democratic forces in our societies today, both in daily life, on the political level, on the media level, and online. Those forces seem so large that it's very, very difficult for us as simple, vulnerable individuals to stand up and resist. But this year, especially in this part of Europe, we've been energized by thousands and thousands of people on the streets protesting against corruption, claiming a decent society, claiming transparent politics, claiming reliable institutions. Thousands and thousands of people. Some of the organizers of those protests and marches will be here with us on stage this afternoon. And I keep thinking about last night. Svetlana Alexievich, such a, how do you say, modest monument of a person. She said yesterday, the only thing that keeps her living and working in the face of all the horrors and tragedies is that she listens to people. The moments that she can listen to the voices and the stories of people that you otherwise do not see and hear. That is what keeps her going. After that, Ivan Kostev and Nathalie Nogueirede and Timothy Snyder went into a dazzling conversation on how we should attempt to create an idea for a collective future. Not just individual future, not just what is good for us, but what is good for the whole of the community, the whole of the society. Today, in 4 different sessions between now and 8 o'clock, we'll have a number of fearless individuals who've been thinking and acting and writing to create a scenario where the whole world doesn't go in flames in the overheating world that we live in today. So, if you want to join us on this essay, where we're also curious for your questions and comments in the meantime, if you want to join us on this essay, let's start here and now. And I want to introduce you to an extraordinary young man from Norway. His name is Erik Kuscheder. And here he is. There you go, Erik.
Thank you very much.
You've been around for a few days. We'll get to that. But to introduce Erik very shortly, student, politically active in the council of his town in Norway and in the region. But when he was 18 years old, in the summer of 2011, he was on that island, Utøya. That island where he and his fellow participants in the meeting of the Workers' Youth League spent the annual summer camp. And on that day, on 22 July, Anders Breivik appeared on the island and started shooting indiscriminately, killing 69 young people. You remember that. Eric was there, and I'm so happy that you not just chose to join us here in Bratislava, but also that you took that experience and tried to overcome that by keep working against violence, hatred, discrimination, the big evil that many of us face. Now and that's why I ask you to be here first. We've been talking, we've been working, many of the people here, in the face of evil, in the face of hatred. You literally stood eye to eye with evil in person, with Breivik. You survived. Many of your friends didn't. How did you pick yourself up after that experience and determined that you would try to prevent such things from happening again?
Just hours after arriving at Sundvolden Hotel, after evacuating from the island, I was thinking of my friends, and I was thinking how I should handle this. What am I going to do? And I realized that if it was me who would have lost my life, I would have wanted my friends to fight even harder for our ideals and our ideology.
Even in those first hours, this is something you realized?
Because I realized it was a political attack, that somebody attacked us for our beliefs, and that motivated me just to fight even harder.
Yeah. You've seen him there on that day. You've also seen him in 2015 in court when he was at trial. Again, you observed him very closely. I'm somebody who cannot tolerate even looking in the face of somebody who thinks that I and all the values that I stand for should be exterminated. But you chose to look him in the eyes and to try to figure out what is going on there. You want to know how his mind works. How did you come to that decision?
My goal was to understand what types of mechanism who gets a man with blue eyes and blonde hair from the best part of Oslo to go out to an island and kill 69 people. And before that he killed 8 people in the government quarters. And I wanted to understand what type of ideology, what type of meanings is it that makes it possible for a man to have such a distance from other human beings and have such a distance that he doesn't regard us as human beings anymore.
Yeah. Because, and this is what you discovered, that he, in his own crazy, deranged way, he had created arguments for dehumanizing the other, in this case, you and what you stand for. How does that work? How does that dehumanizing work in the mind of a man like him?
We are not human beings. We are just parasites who are destroying the society. And that distance, when you look at people not as people anymore, that's how you can take a life, because they are not worth anything. And his way of coping with this was not to grieve after what happened, but he was very sad that he killed a mouse on his way for his massacre on the island. And that was how he viewed us as human beings. And I remember attending the court hearings, and he realized that a lot of them who we had tried to kill were in the court with him, and he looked straight through us. We saw him in his eyes, but he looked straight through us. So we were not worth anything.
Mm-hmm. And still, I have to think about what Timothy Snyder said last night. You were there too. He said, it's always better to understand what we fear than not to understand. In this case, of course, Breivik stands for something you fear. But you've gone into an investigation of how that kind of mind works.
To be honest, I'm not most afraid of what he's saying and what it means. I'm most afraid of the indifference that made this possible to happen. Because the problem is that a lot of people are seeing these types of opinions online. They're seeing that people are telling others that they should kill them, but they're not doing anything about it. And I believe that hate is not our biggest enemy. Indifference is.
Indifference includes the idea that the people you don't like are not human beings.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also that indifference, oh, it doesn't affect me personally, so it's not my problem.
Yeah. He doesn't. Your impression is he doesn't carry the burden of having committed a senseless massacre.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, you yourself, you carry a burden. You carry the burden of anybody who survives. Because, of course, you think, I can imagine you think, why am I safe and are those others not? In your case, this is always an individual thing, of course, but in your case, you thought, okay, this gives me kind of responsibility. Can you talk about that?
From the beginning, it was very important for me to remember my friends, remember my party colleagues, and what they stood for. And the Holocaust survivor, Elie Wiesel, said that to forget the dead would not only be offensive, but it would be dangerous, because it would be akin to killing them a second time. And for me, it has been very important to fight even harder for our ideals. Even though it's become much harder to participate in the political debate, I feel that that's the most important thing to do. And even in Norway, we are not protected by our social democracy. There is still a lot of issues in regards to public speaking, in regards to participating in the debate. And I've experienced several times death threats and so on. But my way of handling this has always been confronting. I remember this one time, one of the mayor candidates for the far-right party said that he should put a bullet in my head. And I met him on the street, and I said to him, well, I'm here now. What do you want to do with me? And he looked down, started mumbling, and he said he was sorry. And the problem is right here. He would probably not hurt anyone, but people who are reading his thoughts and his comments may be inspired. And that's what happened with Breivik. In Norway, we have a saying that they are sort of like, they don't fire the bullet, but they put it in the chamber.
They put it in the chamber of the gun in order for somebody else. Yeah. The whole experience also led you to take responsibility as an active politician for the Social Democrat Party on municipal level, on regional level. Was your, how do you say, was your conviction to find your future in representative democratic politics not shaken by this outburst of violence against this kind of system?
Well, actually, I think it got even stronger, because by showing these atrocities and what happened in Norway and all over Europe, the developments made my belief in politics even stronger, because it's now we need decent politicians and we need decent policy making, and that's why my belief is even stronger now, I guess.
Okay. Many of us here believe that Norway is one of the handful of countries remaining in the world where life is good, decent, civilized, including institutions, economy, and politics. Is it that fairy tale?
Well, we are also we are also affected by global trends in regards to criticizing of journalists, politicians who are using populist acts on mainstream media and so on. So we are not protected completely from our surroundings. And of course we see a development where the debate is hardening. And we've had situations in Norway where, for example, our justice minister needed to resign because she said that on Facebook that the Labour Party was more interested in protecting terrorists' rights than protecting the nation's security. It was in regards to a case about nationality and how we should handle taking away passports, and so she just attacked the Labour Party. So we see a lot of the same trends in Norway as we see in other European social democracies.
You've said before that one of the lessons you've tried to develop through this experience is that you see that many people in our societies can become estranged. They can become isolated, fortified in their own frustration about what's going on in the world. They feel powerless, and this can lead people to radicalize. And you seem to be on a mission to prevent people from becoming estranged like that, to prevent people from radicalizing. How do you do that?
Well, first we need to look at the mechanism, what makes people do things like that. And of course there are different types of ideologies and different types of things that triggers this. But if you look at a specific case in regards to Breivik, we see an entire life where he has fallen out of the system, where the childcare has not been good enough and the communication between the institutions are not good enough. So I think we have a lot to learn in regards to how we handle that. And because of this society, because we have an extreme increase in wealth and a lot of people are having it much better, it's even worse to be a loser now because so many people have it so well. And one of the things that probably triggered him was that he thought he was a winner, but he was not. So he was trying to portray himself as the savior of Norway, and in his own delusional mind. And he managed to do this also by engaging in a parallel society and removing himself from the society directly.
And you see many, many other peoples who, in today's words, are the losers of our society. They become more isolated. They fall through the web of the institutions that should take care of them. As a representative of the Social Democrats, are you active in creating programs, funding initiatives, creating policy in order to keep people on board?
I've been in different types of committees for the Health Directorate, etc., where we have tried to develop functions which makes it easier for people to get the help they need, lower the threshold of help. And that has been also one of my important political priorities in Norway. But I see that we have a lot to learn from each other. So I can't stand here today and say that my model is exactly the right one. But I believe that cross-border cooperation in these matters will be really important in the future when we will see issues with people feeling overwhelmed by what's happening in regards to digitalization and moving of jobs, etc.
Yeah. Now, you're very sharp on this cross-border cooperation, rightly so. I believe that too, which also meant you were reading up on what's going on in Slovakia before you came here. This is your first visit. And just like me in Amsterdam, it's very difficult to get extensive, reliable news from what's going on here in Slovakia. Well, we're all part of Europe.
Well, at least I've heard that social democrats here are not the same as in Norway. But,
because you arrived, you immediately dove into the heart of things. You were standing on the square on Friday night. How was that?
It was an amazing experience, and one of the organizers translated a lot of the speeches here, and I see that we have a lot of the same values and ideals of what we want to develop our country into, and that's why I think cross-border cooperation is so important, because a lot of the same mechanisms are happening here as in Norway. Of course, a very different story with the political situation here in Slovakia, but still I think there is a lot to learn.
Yeah. And returning to what you said earlier about Elie Wiesel, when you quoted him. You were also moved by the fact that this movement for a decent Slovakia was triggered to remember, commemorate, and carry on the work of Jan Kuciak, who was killed in February. Did you feel that? Did you somehow link up to that idea, we should not forget, we should carry on?
You know, there is very few things that gets me emotional. Even when people tell me they want me dead, I don't care so much about it. But when I see people get together, share a common goal, it moves me. And when I attended the protests and that I could hear this solidarity, that we have not forgotten this journalist, and that we will keep fighting for Jan, it's marvelous. And the way the organizers have been working on the front row as well, it's incredible. And I hope that I see that this is a trend in Europe in general, that we are moving apart from the party politics, and we're moving into movements instead. And that's what's happening here as well. Yeah. I myself am more of a collectivist, so I still believe in the party politics. And that was also, as you mentioned in the beginning, why I chose to engage more after what's happened, because I believe that the best solutions we can find together, I guess.
So did you, okay. We'll have one of the organizers of For Decent Slovakia, Tanja Sladaková, here on stage in a minute. But have you entered, meeting the people who are on the streets here, have you entered into a discussion about if it makes sense to go into party politics? Because here the trust in participation in party politics is lower than in Norway, I'm sure. Have you entered into that discussion?
Yes, I met with several people, for example, representatives from Progressive Slovakia, and I see that there is a movement here rising now, also a political party. I will not indulge myself too much in Slovakian politics, but I think it's good that we see now a center-left party in this country who can manage to do a lot of good in regards to political priorities. But I see that the trust is very low in regards to established parties, as we've also seen in Europe. And yeah.
You also told me that whenever you go to a city you haven't been before, you like to go to the oldest, most traditional pubs late at night in order to meet the real people. Is that also a thing about trying to understand people who might not think and behave like you?
Yes, because when you attend a political conference or you meet party colleagues from other countries, it's very hard to get a direct opinion what is happening in that country. But when you meet people on a brown pub and you tell them that you're interested in politics, it may go very well, but it also may end very bad if they get very, very angry. But it's still a great way of speaking directly to the people and learn about their challenges in their daily life.
So what were you talking about last night at 2 o'clock in the morning?
I'm not sure if I can say that publicly. But talking about how we can make Slovakia more equal, how we can make the regions more equal, and how we can make the school system better for Slovakia. That was the discussion.
See, that is what you talk about late at night in the bars of Bratislava.
But I'm maybe not a more normal pub talker, though.
I'm sure you're not. But you're continuing. I mean, you're continuing the conversation as we speak here. How can you, how do you say, consolidate the first alliances that you've created here now?
Well, I think that I will keep in contact with a lot of the people from this conference, because we obviously have a lot to learn from each other. And I think I had like 15 friend requests after attending this conference. So it's so I think that grassroots level activism, as this protest also demonstration also has been, is one of the best ways of developing policy. And if you have the trust of the people, And if it comes as a grassroots initiative, you will manage to hit a nerve and a pulse. And that is maybe what Slovakia has been lacking. And I think that in the future, Slovakia will have great possibilities in regards to activism. So I'm crossing my fingers for you guys.
And you'll be back, of course.
Of course, I love Slovakia and I love Bratislava.
Oh my God, he's become a patriot already after 3 days. Who in the audience would like to ask or comment on Eric's experience and observations? Not immediately. Yeah. Are we gonna?
Rada by som vedela, aký je názor norskej spoločnosti.
Excuse me.
I would like to. I can speak English.
Sure, but we don't have the headphones yet.
Can I ask you, what is the Norway public's opinion to the sentence which Breivik got, which is 22 years, and yours maybe too? Okay?
It's a very interesting and very debated question in Norway as well, especially.
Can you explain the question a bit for me?
Oh, okay. She asked in regards to the penalty Breivik got, and that he was sentenced to 21 years, and what do I and the Norwegian public think about it? And the answer is, it's been a debate, especially about among youths, in regards to death penalty and so on. The public opinion is that the penalty he got was correct, because it's our justice system who sentenced to 21 years, but he will not get out after 21 years. We have 30 to 40 prisoners in Norway who are still a threat to the society and will still be kept in prison, if that was an answer to your question.
I didn't think of this penalty, but I saw 22 years was really short.
Yes, the Americans are very shocked. So every time I get a message from Americans.
He was that young, you know, when he...
You're talking about life sentence.
Yes. Because I find him dangerous any time of his life.
That's correct.
Others? Not immediately. I don't expect you to be an expert in Slovak politics after such a short time, but when we met each other earlier today, you said your impression after having some political talks here these days. Thank you for the headphones. One of your first impression about political situation today in Slovakia is that you think there seems to be a vacuum in the center-left of the system. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It seems, as we talked about, the trust to the established parties are very low, and I see that there has been a lacking in the central left, especially in regards to liberals. For example, from what I've heard, there is no Slovakian member of the ALDE party group in the European Parliament until now, until the progressive Slovakia. And there is a lot of young people who believe in progressive policies, and obviously haven't found a party they can trust to handle their trust. So, like briefly, that is my impression.
First impression.
First impression.
Yeah. Because this is the domain within the political field that you, with your party in Norway, are trying to refresh and develop.
Yeah, the Labour Party in Norway is the central left left party.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't be shy.
Thomas Butula up here, and the microphone is coming to you, sir.
You asked about the parties on the left, and in the last weeks and months, several essays and studies were published and articles which are analyzing and describing rather different phenomenon, and it is that And I simplify a bit, that in a civil society in general, and it is from Latin America to Europe to Asia, that it's the opposite trend is possible to notice, and it is the increase of, I would say, conservative elements and conservative grassroots groups, conservative movements. So do you see something similar also in Scandinavia and in Norway? We saw some results of some elections, or do you perceive it as just a cycle? It's rather now a conservative tone, it will pass, and again another line will be supported.
If there are any conservative grassroots movements growing in Scandinavia?
Yeah, it's a worldwide phenomenon, as you say, so you see that probably in Scandinavian countries as well. Do you think that is going to expand, or is it a phase we're going through?
Well, there is a trend in all countries, as you mentioned, because the problem has been that the people have not felt that the politicians are talking directly to them and are answering their questions and their problems and their cases they're wondering about. So, of course, there has been a development in Norway as well, especially in regards to populism, as I mentioned earlier with our justice minister who had to resign because of her awful message on Facebook. Mm-hmm. So we see the same trends in Norway as well. Maybe not as strong, but they're still there, yes.
Cool. Eric, thank you so much. We're going to move on, and I hope you can stay. We're going to move on to talk about the demonstrations on the streets in this country and others in the region. So for now, I just want to ask you for very clear, very powerful, and very, how do you say, encouraging stance that you took from one of the tragedies of this century. Thank you so much, Erik Kuschedek. Okay, little change of scenery, because we're going to be joined now, under your applause, by Marci Shore, by Mikolas Minar, by Radu Vanku, and by Tanja Sedlakova. Please join us on stage. There you are. Hello. Okay, did I actually hear you clapping seriously for these people? Can we do it again? These are the people, together with their friends, who are getting people on the streets in Prague and the Czech Republic, in Bratislava and Slovakia, in Sibiu and other cities in Romania. And Marci Shore has written a book about the Maidan, of course, the inspirational months-long occupation of the square in Kiev 13-14. So what we're going to talk about here is 2018-17 in the Romanian case has been such a surprise, and in many ways also a positive surprise. It gives energy. It proves something that Eric was just talking about, that yes, there are people who actually dare to go on the streets together and to stand up against crime and criminal politics that has gone too far. Here in Slovakia, I don't think it happened for a long, long time. But it's happening now. Eric was part of the demonstration here on Friday night. So it's happening now. And I want to hear your stories about this. This was not a master plan, you know, designed by George Soros a few years ago and paid for. This is something that sprung up from a generation of people who say, we do not accept this kind of society and this kind of government. Maybe, Marcy, we should begin with you. Just because I thought your book about Maidan, the Ukrainian night, an intimate history of the revolution. It's just been published, I think, a few months ago. It's been very, very, very interesting, exciting actually to read. You spoke to many, many people who were involved in different ways in Maidan. I believe you've described the experience and interviewed people in ways that resonate with the others here. One of the things that a number of people have told you is that being on Maidan changed them fundamentally. And I would like you to talk a little bit about the change that people are talking about, also because the others here on stage are being changed as we speak. Could you tell us a little bit about the stories of change that participants in the Maidan have experienced and gone through?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you to Marta and for the Central European Forum for inviting me. I'm very happy to be back in Bratislava. I feel a bit as if I shouldn't go first because I'm the one who's not a real activist. I'm just a historian, and I write about other people's dramatic experiences. So I feel like a bit of a charlatan. I'm a historian. I never intended to write about anything that was happening in real time. I never intended to write about the Maidan. In some sense, I specifically intended not to write about the Maidan or anything that was happening in real time. All of the advantages a historian has come from retrospect. Looking back, you can know more than anybody could possibly know in real time. And Hannah Arendt says that the actor is never the author of his or her life story. It's only the historian looking back who could see what it was all about. Both because you can see wider, you can gather more sources, and because you know how events played out, which nobody knows in real time. But what happened, and the reason I couldn't turn away, even though I tried to turn away from what was happening in Ukraine, was because I understood that in all the 20-some years I've been hanging out in Eastern Europe, which is now my whole adult life, that was the most extraordinary thing I had ever seen in real time. I had heard many stories about extraordinary things, about what in German you call Grenzerfahrungen, these kind of border experiences. But that was always before my time. That was always stories from friends who were older than I was telling me about things that happened before I arrived. And the Maidan was the most extraordinary thing that had happened, in my time here. And I'm not an explicitly political person. I don't normally follow politics that quickly. I write about philosophy and I write about literature. But what I understood about the Maidan was precisely what Chris said, that this wasn't just a political protest and it wasn't just something that was ushering in political changes, that there was actually an existential transformation, that human souls were actually changing, kind of in front of me in real time. And that was something I found impossible to turn away from. And that was something I think I felt more acutely because, they were people I knew, people I know, my friends and colleagues and the friends and colleagues of my friends and colleagues. And while, of course, there are people being transformed every day around the world, making decisions to risk their lives, of course it's different when it's people you know. You know, the world is not really, you know, in my mind, the world is not really divided into people of one's own nationality or another nationality or one's own race and another race. It's really people you know personally and people you don't know personally. And the people you know personally, you feel their stories more intensely because you know them, regardless of how you got to know them or in what situations you encountered them. So while I'm not East European at all, I'm not Ukrainian at all, this is my world. I've been hanging out here my whole adult life.
This also established kind of trust among you and the people you're talking with, who are friends and colleagues, or friends and colleagues of friends and colleagues. In order for you to get to the core of the experience. So again, that change. Some of the figures in your book went through the fall of the Soviet Union, went through the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, but this time was different. This time they didn't feel, when they left, when Maidan ended, they didn't feel, okay, it was fine while it lasted, but we didn't really fundamentally change anything. This time was different, wasn't it?
I think the Maidan had an existential depth I don't think the Orange Revolution had. For me, the Maidan was, well, let me say this. I mean, what brought me to Eastern Europe in the first place, you know, in some sense, was the magical legacy of dissent. You know, it was the language of Václav Havel and Carta Sedum Desat Sedum, which was not a language I had ever heard in American politics. When Havel came to the United States in Washington in February 1990, you know, and said, no, viedel mi pshechaze no biti. You know, consciousness precedes being. No American politician has ever talked about consciousness and being. This was a language of metaphysics. And that language disappeared after the fall of communism. You know, and I had this strange vicarious nostalgia for it. You know, and I was only hearing about it and reading about it and writing about it, but it wasn't the language that was surrounding me in real time. The Maidan was the return of metaphysics. I don't think that was true in 2004. And the people who were my age, who were kind of my generation, who had gone through the fall of the Soviet Union and then went through the Orange Revolution, were extremely self-critical. And the self-criticism was kind of, there was a remarkable consensus about it. And that was the feeling that in 2004, they were still under illusions of paternalism. That there was this sense that, well, we had a bad Tsar, we were going to replace him with a good Tsar. We had a bad father, we were going to replace him with a good father. We were going to get the good guy in power, and then it was all going to be okay. You know, and that, okay, so we got the good guy, we delegated everything to Yushchenko, and then we all went home and got on with our lives. And that there was a kind of infantilism in the Freudian sense about that. You know, and that this time, we understood that there's no Messiah, there's no good Tsar, there's no father, that it's just us. It's just us. Nobody is going to change the country besides us. There's no waiting for anybody. Responsibility begins with us, you know, and we have to carry this out ourselves. And the language of subjectivity and responsibility that I found on the Maidan was a language that I knew as a historian. You know, I knew it from the 60s and 70s and 80s. I knew it from dissident philosophy. I knew it from existentialism. I knew it from, to some extent, revisionist Marxism. You know, I knew it from Solidarność. But I hadn't seen it in real time. And now it was back. What does it mean to be a subject and not an object? What does it mean to take responsibility?
Cool, thank you. This is exactly why I wanted you to be the first to speak, because this is the energy, the fire that you carry in the book onwards to us. I believe it's going to be translated in Slovak as well.
Oh, there's an excerpt that's been translated into Slovak.
Okay.
In Tijan, I think.
Sooner or later. Anyway, anybody you can lay hands on other editions, please go and read it. It's good.
There's a very good Polish translation, and there's a Ukrainian translation, which I'm not competent to judge, but my Ukrainian friends tell me it's good. For those of you who read those languages.
Radu Vanku. Marcy Shore is a historian. You're a man of letters. You're a poet. You're a scholar. You're a translator. And suddenly, I mean, you teach literature. You shouldn't be in the streets, you should be in the library. Still in the beginning of 2017, when Romanian government threatened to roll back the anti-corruption laws, basically protecting their own. You went on the streets. Why?
Well, of course, I would have preferred to stay in the library, in my personal home, writing my narcissistic poems and literature and so on. But, you know, sometimes you feel that writers are like antibodies. When there is something wrong in the social or political body, they are generated in a larger number in order to neutralize the infection. Of course, it's also narcissistic what I'm saying right now. But this may explain why a large number of writers, not only me, were in the streets in Romania in 2017. We felt we have to get out, we have to see what happens, to write against them, because we may sometimes use words more precisely or more energetically than other people, and tell what is going on there. And there are so many writers in the streets. I'm not a particular case, I'm not isolated. There are writers who, I think the oldest among us is a philosopher who is 102. He is a colleague of generation with Émile Cioran, with Eugène Ionesco. He has published his first book in Gallimard in the 40s. And he is in the streets, even when there is minus 20 Celsius degrees. Mr. Șora, he's there in the streets with us, protesting, writing on his Facebook page, which is, of course, very, very popular. And one of the youngest protesters probably is my son, who is who's also a writer, of course, even though he's 9. He is a wonderful writer. He has written 2 novels about cats, unpublished yet, of course. So everybody with a moral sense, I think, is in the streets. And some writers also have moral sense, surprisingly.
Yeah. Some writers do, actually, and most of them are here. Still, obviously, I don't know if you had ever organized street protests before?
No. I have written before against some political gestures, but I have never organized. I was never so pissed off as in order to organize protests. But you know, maybe you don't know the exact context. Probably you don't. So it was so outrageous. There is this head of the so-called Social Democrat Party, who is neither social nor Democrat, but is populist and illiberal, who has been convicted with suspension sentence, with suspended sentence for embezzling funds. He has 4 ongoing trials. He has been convicted in the first one, definitively, but with suspended sentence. And this is the most unserious one. It's only about 200,000 euros.
What was his name again?
Dragnea, Liviu Dragnea.
Dragnea.
And this guy, after he was convicted, he thought, well, since I'm in power, since I run the Romanian largest party, I could simply modify the laws of justice so that the crime that I was convicted for doesn't exist anymore. And he asked the legal experts of his party to write a law project, which to annihilate any fund embezzling lesser than 200,000 euros. That was his. So, of course, when we heard about that, we were shocked and outraged, and we went into the streets and we told him, we understood that you prepare this kind of ridiculous, stupid, and outrageous law. Do not do it. And he denied. He said, I don't intend to do such a thing. Then, in January 2017, the president, the Romanian president, who's on the good side of the things, he's from another party.
His name?
His name is Iohannis.
Iohannis.
He's from the Saxon minority. He used to be the mayor of Sibiu, the city I live in, and he was a very good mayor. So this is why he was elected as a president. And Iohannis was informed that that law is prepared. He went to the governmental meeting and told them, do not pass this law. This will shock everybody, this will cause massive protests, and this will shock Europe and any citizen with good sense on this planet. And they denied of course, preparing it, and in night time, they have passed it as an emergency decree.
Which is outrageous.
Outrageous, of course.
And you are on the streets because you want to prevent those kind of things from becoming the new normal.
Yes, and we went into the streets with two motivations. In the first place, to prevent it happening, and afterwards to ask him withdrawing the law.
Yeah.
And in the very night that they passed this emergency decree, we took the streets. And it was about 600,000 Romanians in the streets, asking him...
All across the country, yeah?
Yeah, 300,000 in Bucharest and the rest in the country. And under public pressure, he withdrew it. But then he thought, okay, I will try to pass it via, not as an emergency decree, but via regular parliamentary procedure, but I will modify all the law, in order to get support, I will modify the laws involving all the crimes committed by all the rulers of the Social Democrat Party. So, for example, there is a guy running this so-called Social Democrat Party who is under trial for sexual harassment. And at one point, they thought about decriminalizing sexual harassment. So, of course, it's so abusive, so annoying, that it keeps us in the streets for the last 2 years.
Yeah. You haven't noticed, Radu, but your colleagues here, at the beginning, when you described what happened, they were smiling, like they recognized the practices. But as
Probably the same symptoms.
As you continued your story, your faces became grimmer. Because it's funny for 2 seconds, and then it's no longer funny. Just one more thing before we move on, Radu, because that, how do you say, that speaks to me as a writer and other literary people here. In the beginning, you organized something which I'd never heard about, a reading demonstration. What was that? This was just a few weeks after this first time on the streets.
As time passed by, it was obvious that the politicians, learned how to manage the shock and the pressure. So we started looking for alternative protests, which they do not expect, which to draw attention and to put pressure on them in things they have never thought before. One of them was this reading protest. We created a network around the country, and on a specific day, everybody got in the streets or in the markets, in the squares, with books and silently read for a few hours. I myself took Henry David Thoreau on the duty of public disobedience, of course, because I think it's important to have this kind of public disobedience.
Could you do us the pleasure of reading your own description of what happened? Because I think it's so beautiful, this in italics.
Some 200 to 300 people gathered in the main square in Sibiu and quietly sat on benches or directly on the ground and read from Thoreau, for example, from On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, or from the Bible, or from Jean-Claude Carriere's The Circle of Liars. So it's also very effective. It's so powerful to see these young people using reading as a political tool against the corrupt government. So even when the government doesn't want to react, going there in the streets and protesting by reading, tweeting, writing on Facebook, dancing, playing the guitar, doing a play, for example, it always works. It is the force of art, actually. I mean, seeing so many people gathered in a square is like living a fiction. It's living a fairy tale. It's like a huge poem made of a million lines, each person being a line. No government can resist against such a huge poem. It's like trying to resist against the Iliad or the Odyssey. You have no chance. So it is absolutely applicable in every part of the world.
Later on, we'll get back to the situation today, because certainly last summer it became less of a fairy tale. Yeah. But first, let's move on. Like you say here, it's like a huge poem made of a million lines. I've never heard a demonstration being described like that, but it did remind me of you, of course, Mikolas, because you started A Million Moments for Democracy.
Yes.
Yes.
And you just, I mean, it's super special that you're here because last night you organized a huge demonstration again in Prague, but now you're here. Like the historian, like the poet and writer, you, if everything had been normal, should be a philosopher, studying language and literature, studying theology, studying the philosophy of anthropology and religion. That is what you set out for, but now you're one of the movers and shakers of what's happening on the streets.
Yes, but I'm sorry, I should speak in Czech.
Sure.
Yeah. Tak je, ano, to je pravda. Milí přátelé, já děkuji za pozvání.
Yes. Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me begin by saying that you in Slovakia most probably know what's going on in our country. Let me sum it up in 5 minutes so that you get the background and you know what we are protesting against. 29 years ago, we took over responsibility for what's going on in our country, and we won freedom. Nevertheless, over those 29 years, we made a lot of mistakes, and our political parties got discredited. And this is also the reason why in 2017, Mr. Babiš won in the elections with his ANO movement. Babiš is an oligarch. He is the second richest person in our country, and he is currently being prosecuted for subsidy fraud, and we were afraid of what would become when he gets elected. What is the situation today? In 2017, the populist movement of Babiš got a majority, followed by communists, and the third place was held by a fascist-leaning party questioning, for instance, Roma Holocaust. So these three parties faced the democratic parties. Unfortunately, they prevailed because they had 5 votes more than the democratic opposition. After the elections, we did not know what to do, but we wanted to do something. Before elections, Mr. Babiš promised the Czech citizens that he would carry out some actions like promoting democracy, and we urged him to promote democracy as he promised. Since he didn't do it, we started criticizing him, but he could not say that we do not have any reason for being critical. We tried to appeal to people, and we urged Mr. Babiš to take 10 steps. But then it became quite apparent that he never meant his keeping his promises, and he had to rely on the support of communists. It turned out that his criminal prosecution was based on solid grounds, and the Bratislava court ruled that he has been listed as an agent of secret police. And therefore, we decided that we have to do something, because it is probably useless to try to appeal on the consciousness of this person. This is why we published an appeal that we do not want a secret police agent to be our prime minister. And this appeal was supported by 2,000 people who gave their signatures over the span of 20 days. The main idea is that if 1 million of people will give a minute to doing something maybe very little, like coming to a demonstration or signing a petition, the overall effect would be tremendous. And we believe that this has really been proven, because we organized a number of large-scale protests, the last of them last night, and it was held under the motto for a decent Czechia, for a decent Czech Republic. We were inspired by the Slovak movement. The demonstration was held at the Old Times Square with around 25,000 people in attendance. I would like to explain why we convened the meeting, the march. The situation in the Czech Republic today is quite absurd because of several reasons. Not only Babiš is a criminally prosecuted secret police agent, he relies on communists, but moreover, a few days ago, the reporters found out that he may have had his son abducted to Crimea in order to prevent him from testifying in criminal proceedings. This evoked an outcry among the public at large and the politicians as well. And they started to call for his resignation. And what Babiš said the day before yesterday, he said, "I will never resign, never." Remember it. He thus brought the Czech Republic close to a rogue country, and but this was not all, because a few days later, our president said if the prime minister is asked for resignation and would be forced to resign, he would, the president reappoint him again to the office of prime minister. The party of Babiš upholds their boss as a sect because there is no democracy within the party. Also, Babiš has a majority of MPs. It means that he cannot be recalled, and if he is recalled, the president would reappoint him again. It means that we seem to be powerless, but the only thing we have is the power of the powerless. It is the decency, it is the courage to ask for the impossible. And let me finish by saying, why should Babiš resign? He should resign because it is decent. Our constitution does not state that a person under criminal prosecution, a secret police agent, or a person who had his son abducted to Crimea cannot be our prime minister. If the constitution doesn't say so, and if the president openly says that he will not respect the will of the parliament, that's going against democratic institutions, it means these are the people who have no consciousness, who have no decency, and this is why we have to continue fighting for decency.
Mikolas, thank you. Now, if you have a president, a prime minister, who, how do you say, who breaks all the taboos, who's been part of the secret service underneath the transnational regime that ruled the country before, who has embezzled subsidies from the transnational regime that rules the country now. He even calls his children mentally ill, you know, breaking even the bond of the family. So he's breaking all the taboos. Who are the people who are supporting him outside of President Zeman?
I think that's really the most important question, because even if we manage to force him to resign, his voters will stay with us forever, and the people have certain reasons why they do so, and we try to organize our protests in such a way that we also remember those people, so that our narrative is not something they would make them despised, or that there is no place for them in future. People who voted for Babiš are those who lost confidence in politics. They see all political affairs as dirt. And they also don't think that Babiš is a clean person. They would say, yes, it might be so that he has committed fraud and stole 50 million, but what? It's stealing from the EU and it serves the public. And before his era, there were people taking away even more money. He made some promises. He said that he will stop the petty crime, and that he will be an effective manager, and he will run the country as a company, and that parliament is only a discussion club. That is what our ex-socialist President Gottwald used to say in the 50s. So this is something people are impressed by, because though he is the richest person in the country, and he is for 20 years a part of a network, clients network, and has contacts with corrupt politicians, he always says that these bad, corrupt elites are the ones to blame for. And he says, look, I am just a simple person. He would have jeans and pullover, and he has personal charisma. He travels the country, he meets old ladies, shakes their hands, and his party has really sucked out the whole left wing. And he comes with populist promises, and he increases our state debt, in spite of the fact that we have an unprecedented economic growth. He told people it will be better, there will be a change, and he's a manager who can do it. And don't forget that he has two other advantages. He has really fantastic marketing and 10 times more means available than all other parties together. During the communal elections in Prague, he invested 50 million Czech crowns, which is 4 times more than all other parties together. So when you see this, you understand what is the result.
There's 25,000 of you in the streets, and it's him on his own in the palace. Who knows what's going to happen? Let's continue about that in a minute. Tanya, I think you were supposed to be working on PhD in social psychology right now?
Yeah, I'm not. But
Instead, you just published, together with your friends, this book which documents all the speeches and pictures of the demonstrations that happened here since the killing of, I want to say her last name correctly, Jan Kuciak and Martina Kushnirova in February. We were talking about this yesterday. You are not an experienced activist. You didn't organize street protests before. But at that moment it was inevitable. Small circle of friends immediately mobilized. How did that happen?
Dobrý večer, alebo teda dobré poobedie.
So good afternoon. I believe it is about what Marci has already said, and that is this transformation which has started in this country was a political transformation, and then we have this existential moment. That is how it started here. We felt an existential threat because we had our lives, let's say, projected in a certain values and a culture we were raised in by our parents. And I think that in this country it was this existential threat which united us. So we are a group of people who didn't know each other before, and it's really coincidence that it happened like it happened. it's also a consequence of technology, because a friend of us started an event and she thought only a few people will come. Then Juraj, who is here with us, organized a commemoration, etc. And somehow it happened that we have created this group. And I think the luck was that we are a not homogeneous group. We are ideologically not homogeneous, which is good. And another important thing is that we respect each other and we like each other. And it means that we can talk and we can quarrel, but we still can continue to like each other.
So you didn't know each other so well before. A trust has been created on the basis of which you are able to discuss about everything, disagree about many things, and still stick together. That's one of the secrets. In any case, all three of you tapped into something at a moment that many, many people in your societies thought, okay, this is the red line, this is too far, we shouldn't accept this anymore. But Tanya, can you tell me about the discussion you had and still have, I think, about we're in the streets out of anger, but it should also be about hope. Because you can be against something, but you should also try to create something. Can you talk to that?
Áno, samozrejme. No,
Yes, I must admit that I have never ever experienced so much anger as this year. And often I feel like giving up to pessimism, but I always see a spark of hope in everything. And I think it is what Radu has mentioned and Mikuláš has mentioned, and that is that our activity is for us about culture, about reading the poetry in the name. I think that we get hope from the people themselves, the people who trust in us, and the solidarity we feel. Sometimes we are more popular, sometimes maybe less popular, and it's not so easy to walk the streets and to show our face. But there is still a link among people, and we know that they stand behind us, that we don't have to be afraid. And the second moment is this cultural phenomenon. We don't have any other chance, I believe. We can only stand behind our conviction that we need a great cultural transformation at the political level and at the level of civic society. And that is what Marta and Andrea rightly call demanding the impossible. We have nothing else to opt for than to be real idealists, because we need political reform and opening of civil society.
You told me usually you're mostly working behind the screens. You're not so used to be the one speaking in public. I think
that's the reason I'm so nervous.
Very well. Now, Timothy Snyder, last night, he was talking to us about ideals and idealism. He said, sure, an ideal is by definition impossible to reach. Equality, fairness, peace. But what would life be if we gave up on pursuing ideals? And that is maybe a similar thing to what you are saying now. You started out with a quite modest slogan, in my view, for a decent Slovakia. I mean, you're asking for what should be the most normal thing in the world. It's very, I understand it, but it's very modest. By now, at the end of this year, have you and the others started discussing about maybe creating a blueprint for a future after you've conquered these criminal, corrupt practices? Have you started discussing, writing, speaking about another way that Slovakia, this society, should be managed, run, organized, carried by the people?
Ja si myslím, že vlastne
I believe that what we do is very dynamic, and it's a response to the political context and also the mood among people. And I don't know whether my answer is the answer to your question. However, I have the feeling that one thing is a fair, a just society. That is what we have to demand. And when we decided to call it For a Decent Slovakia, I thought maybe it should be more, it should be called rather For Just Society. But I think that as the time passes, I feel more identified with the thought that the title is a well-chosen one, and Mikuláš mentioned it. What we want is that we want politicians not to follow only the laws, because the change we are hoping for is demanding decency from the people, which means that people who are not in privileged groups or who don't have enough social cultural capital to feel as EU citizens, they should not feel to be humiliated, and the politicians should not be able to abduct their sons, and they should not be able to talk among themselves like being in the last pub somewhere in the forgotten corner of the country. So that is about culture, and I think decency is the right term. And what's ahead of us is to make this change lasting. Last week we had communal elections, and we see that we had a lot of candidates who are from our organizers. They have won in the elections, so we have to trust each other. We must continue trusting each other, and we must keep to decency.
So if I understand it well, you're not writing down a blueprint for a systematic change, you're claiming a cultural change.
Viete, my sa naozaj rôznime aj v tej skupine. Ja môžem...
We have to say that also within our group there is a variety of opinions. As for myself, I have pursued this idea during my entire life, but maybe some other would stress other things such as corruption, etc.
Let's return to you for a minute, because you've been listening and taking notes, I see.
I always take notes.
Mm-hmm. Especially when you're in the middle of a super inspiring conversation. Yeah? Listening to these first stories from people who are organizing people in the streets now, right now, today, correspondences, differences with what you heard and wrote about Maidan. It will work.
Is it working? Okay. No, one thing a lot of people talk to me about on the Maidan, and social media was incredibly important. The internet was incredibly important. You know, it was a revolution that got started on Facebook that might well not have existed had it not been for that original Facebook post written by the Afghan-Ukrainian journalist Mustafa Nayyem, almost exactly now 5 years ago. But people spoke a lot about the importance of physically being there. About corporeal politics, what it meant to physically be in the presence of other people. Even as the virtual world was very important, even as the Maidan was live streaming itself, including people setting up cameras so that in effect people could watch them get shot in real time, which is a whole other topic about the relationship between subjectivity and transparency. What does that kind of self-exposure mean? But the importance of being there with other people, of feeling the physical presence of other people, was something that kept coming up time and time again. And it wasn't necessarily about, you know, fighting or organizing, or it was actually something kind of existential about being physically in the presence of other people and kind of feeling them next to you and walking with them, you know, or handing them tea. And I thought about that a lot. You know, I don't love being in demonstrations. I don't love crowds. You know, it's not really my thing. But for instance, after I'll speak as an American just briefly here, after our catastrophic elections of 2 years ago now, of November 2016, so my children there then were, mine, Tim's children, were 4 and 6. So old enough to understand something, you know, not old enough to understand the details, but old enough to understand that something catastrophic had happened. And when I took them to vote with me, which in the States involved waiting in line for 2 hours because we're completely incompetent and can't run an election. And my son, who was 6, said as we were waiting to vote, he said, "Mommy, if Hillary Clinton wins, then all the grown-ups are going to calm down, right?" And I said, "Yes, it's going to be okay. We're all going to calm down now." And then, of course, you know, I had to tell them the next morning what had happened, which I think I will carry post-traumatic stress from for the rest of my life. But one of the reasons Tim and I then decided that we would take them to New York City the day after the inauguration to join the Women's March. You know, and not only do I not love being in large crowds, but generally when you have 2 small children, the last thing you want to do is jump into a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people because you're in a constant state of terror that you could lose those children, you know, and they're too small to make a phone call, and you know, not that somebody would kidnap them, but they could easily get lost, and how would you ever find them in the crowd? And the reason we did it anyway, and the reason I thought it would be, and it was a good idea, was the comforting physical presence of other people. I mean, even though they couldn't understand, you know, in detail, they had this sense that, you know, it was not only in our house that there was this feeling of the collapse of civilization, you know, that there were all these other people, and other people were coming out, and other people were making signs. My 4-year-old daughter painted a unicorns against Trump sign, which is with lots of different colors. But that sense that they were with other people, even though we didn't necessarily know them, was very, I mean, it was somehow very centering for them. And seeing it through their eyes made me appreciate demonstrations more than I had in the past.
This is something that you get back from the people who were at Maidan. This is something you get back from the people here. Radu, I think both Marcy and Tanya have touched upon something that I think is central in your mind as well. So, in the beginning in Sibiu, you and a lot of other people, 200-300 people, were sitting there reading Thoreau and the Ilias and the Bible and whatever. I'm sure there's many other people in Sibiu who are very angry about what's going on, who feel left behind through what's going on, but they don't read Thoreau at night on the central square in Sibiu. One of your things is you also want to, you say we will never change anything if we do not also include the others who are, you know, in different generations, different classes, different positions in ours. Are you succeeding in doing so?
Yes. Sibiu, for example, is the city in Romania with the largest percentage of participation in the protests. In February 5th, I think, 2017, 43,000 people in a city which has 140,000 inhabitants. So it's almost 1 person out of 3, including old men, children, and so on, were in the streets. It's an impressive array of photos with the central square practically teeming over with people. It was not enough space for how much spirit was there. The thing is, he did not resign. We asked for his resignation because it was
Dragnea.
Dragnea, yeah. So we thought let's find out if large numbers do not impress him, let's find out new methods of protest. One of them was the reading protest, but it was, of course, not enough. And then in last December, December 11, almost 1 year ago, we thought, let's start. So, okay, we understood it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's not a 100-meter sprint. It's not about speed. He will not resign. It's a marathon. We have to find out a method of energy management. So we invented a daily protest. Every day at noon, we gather in Sibiu in front of the headquarters of the Social Democrat Party, and we silently stare at their windows in order to show them that we see them. Even though we do not shout, we do not, we see you. This is the name of the movement. We see you, Vă vedem in Romanian. We see you from Sibiu. We hope that it will spread in the country and it will create a network of We See You movements. And now we have 320 days of daily protest in Sibiu. In December 11, it will be 365 days of continual protest. And this has caught attention, both international and national.
Yeah.
We have been invited to the European Parliament in Brussels after we started the protest to talk with the MEPs who are about to intervene in a plenary about Romania and the rule of law in Romania. And we talked with them, with Roberta Metsola from Malta, with Javier Nart from Spain and so on. And if I say their names, it's because, you see, I think this is what Europe is. Persons from Malta, from Spain, from countries which have no connection with Romania whatsoever, are interested in talking about Romania. And when we went in Brussels, we have these agoras in Sibiu which take place in open air. And we broadcast them live on the internet. And we asked them, okay, we do not want to talk in your offices. We would like to talk outside the European Parliament in open air to make it live on the internet. Good. This is our format of the agora. Would you accept? And they were kind enough to accept. And we started talking. It was March in Brussels. And a Marchy Brussels rain started, which is really, really a frozen rain. And we stood there, we were shivering and talking about Romania and the rule of law. And none of them left. And at one point I asked them, I asked Roberta Metsola and Javier Nart and Ska Keller from the Greens, okay, you have no constituency in Romania, you have no voters in Romania, you shouldn't tremble here, freezing to death and so on. Why do you stay and talk about the rule of law in Romania? And Javier Nart said, well, because you see, Andalusia is Romania and Transylvania is Spain. This is what Europe is about. And I thought it was a beautiful answer from Mr. Nart. And you know what happened? Less than a week ago, 4 or 5 days ago, the European Parliament passed a resolution about Romania, which says exactly what we have been saying in the streets. We have taken our message from the Romanian streets to the European Parliament, and now the European Parliament puts pressure back on them, asking them explicitly to withdraw the massacration of the rule to restore the rule of law in Romania, basically. So I think this is how Europe works and should work. Bring your local tension to the center, and then the center sends it back to the local place. And if Europe has a future, because Timothy Snyder said that last night that maybe the most important problem is that we cannot imagine the future. We cannot imagine the future anymore, and this is maybe the most serious, the most real handicap that we have. Let's imagine the future as such. Bringing the local problem to the center, and then the center sends it back to... This is what Europe is about.
A year ago, if you would have told us this ambition, we would have said this is an impossible dream. But it happened.
I would have also said it's impossible. Yeah.
But it happened. And we should add that, of course, we think that a lot of people in Brussels and Strasbourg should gather at noon and look at the building of the European Parliament as well.
Yes, there are some problems there too. Yeah.
Different scale, different subjects, but...
If we want to build a decent society, we have to see each other. I think this is what Europe is.
This is also the physical closeness that Marcy was talking about. One more question to you, and then I'll move on to Mikolas. Last summer, August 10, big demonstrations, including under the motto Diaspora at Home, including a lot of Romanians who moved from the country elsewhere in Europe, came back to demonstrate with their countrymen in large numbers. And then all of us were shocked by seeing the violent response from the police and the military. What flipped? Because until then, this had not happened.
Until then, it was rather peaceful. There was an attempt in February to infiltrate the crowd with provokers and agitators to transform it into a violent movement, but it failed. So it was really wonderful and peaceful. But in August 10, it was a huge tension created in the months before by the announcement made by Romanian diaspora that they will return and participate in the protests. And one guy from Sweden, when he came back in Romania in his holiday, he bought in Sweden, it was perfectly legal to do it, he bought car plates with the numbers saying in Romanian, "Fac PSD," which was totally legal. I mean, it means nothing in Sweden. In Swedish.
PSD being the so-called Social Democrat.
The so-called Social Democrat Party. And the photos of his car, and then his car entering Romania and coming to Bucharest with those car plates, went viral. And it became a mass movement, this, I will say it in Romanian because in English sounds too offensive, this Muie PSD car plates it was a mass phenomenon. A farmer in Cluj in Transylvania, using his tractor and the GPS, cut the grass on his land property, so that from the plane you could see in huge lines Muie PSD if you flew above Cluj, or these kind of things, you know.
Which meant "Fac PSD."
Fac PSD,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just some Romanian hackers hacked Waze. And when you traveled Romania, "Fac PSD" was written on streets, markets, boulevards, and so on. So, you know, first of all, it was funny, but this annoyed PSD enormously. Because this got to the capillaries of the society, to the lowest level. It was not an intellectual discussion anymore about freedom, rule of law, and so on. It went even to their voters, and this was a scandal for them. They had 46% in December 2016 when they won the elections, and now the opinion polls say that they have less than 25%.
Right.
So it's a massive dropout.
Yeah, this is what we were talking about before, that you are reaching out to other levels, all levels of society.
And this is why they created this aggressive, violent counter demonstration. I mean, it was not a counter demonstration. They used the gendarmes. They beat us. One person dead. 700 or 800 persons hospitalized. And I was there. I have seen scenes which seemed for me unacceptable and nightmarish. People throwing up on the streets, children crying, old women and old men passing because of tear gas, and people drawn out even from taxis, drawn by the gendarmes and beaten. It was of course unacceptable, and they hoped that this is the method that they will finally intimidate us.
Which didn't
happen. The next day we were in Bucharest in the same large numbers, showing them we do not fear you. And now there is an investigation against the people who I mean the Ministry of Internal Affairs.
Because Marcy, just in between, reminds me of the story of Maidan, where also at one moment in that cold winter it flipped into very, very bloody violence. That was not the moment that killed the revolution. On the contrary, that was the moment that closeness, bonds between strangers, and this metaphysical quality became stronger. Am I right?
As a historian, the remarkable moment for me came on November 30th, when it had been some 9 days of mostly students, mostly young people.
2013.
2013, the last 10 days of November, protesting on the main square in Kiev, protesting against the Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's sudden decision not to sign the European Union Association Agreement. It was a couple hundred people, a few hundred people, several hundred. And then Yanukovych decided to send out his special police force, Berkut, to brutally beat up the students. I think not to massacre them, but to scare them, to beat them up enough that the parents would pull them back off the streets and it would all be over. And so many, as a historian, so many revolutions can be imploded as Oedipal rebellions. You know, you watch one generation after another rising up against the fathers. And at this moment, the kids get beaten up, the students get beaten up. Yanukovych is counting on the parents to pull the kids off the street. And instead, from several hundred people on that square, a day later you have close to 1 million people. And suddenly they're not talking about the association agreement, they're saying we will not permit them to beat our children.
Right.
And that's when it turned.
The fathers didn't pull their children back, they joined.
The fathers joined them there, and that was an extraordinary thing as a historian to see. I spoke to this one 16-year-old, I'm saying kids, not to be condescending, but because they were very young people who were actually, you know, still living with their parents, pre-university age. And you know, so a young person who was 16 years old, still in school, living with his mother, his shoulder was battered. And I said, your mother must have been very upset. You know, I have kids, I know I would be very upset, you know, but she let you go back. And he said, my mother was making Molotov cocktails on Hrushevskova Street.
Mikolas, to move on, the way you describe the protests, the scale of the protest, the people that are joining you, the people who feel offended, I think sooner or later Babiš will fall. What is your aim after that?
Yes, I agree. I think that his position cannot be a lasting position, and I don't believe that his own party would tolerate him for 3 years, because he acts like a dictator, and that is the way he handles his family, his party, so it cannot have a long life. Yes, we are thinking about the future, because when he vanishes, somebody else will come. And the point is a deep social transformation. Maybe you know the sentence of Masaryk, that we have now democracy. So what we need now are some Democrats. And I think this is what we really need, because we need people not voting for populists, to be resistant against populism.
Second, you are not looking for one guy being replaced by another guy. You're not looking, as was the case at the early stages in Ukraine, for a messiah who will solve everything. You are looking for a completely different way of organizing, of governing.
Přesně tak, jako naši...
Exactly. We don't want to be a protesters against Babiš. We want to cultivate democracy, public discussion, civic involvement in the Czech Republic. So primarily we tell people, you are those we were waiting for. It's not about us, about our club. It's not about politicians. It's about million people doing every day this petty work, be interested in politics, saying things, and not be ignorant, because if you are 1 million people engaged, the country will look differently. The second thing is that we realize that Mr. Babiš, Okamura, and other politicians are phenomena on the surface. We see, according to the results of the election, we see how they behave in parliament. But behind them, there are other deeper reasons, some root reasons, some problems in issues in our societies, resulting in the election victory of such figures. So for me, it is more important to handle the root causes, because if we are not remedying them, we will be in a vicious circle. So we need to make an analysis why people vote as they vote. And we have many problems in this respect. We have 1 million people, that is 10% of the population, who are under strain, execution. We have very low media literacy, zero trust in politics, low political literacy. We would need a education system reform, etc., etc. So I believe that one of the goals for the future should be that the people we were able to get united today on let's defend democracy, let's fight Babiš. We need to know that and make them aware that this is not the end. We now have to work for and fight for better education system. We must fight against exclusion of millions of people, which means there is time to handle, to address serious problems, because then we may hope that our democracy will be a healthy one. At the same time, we also try to mobilize people to stand for certain values. During the protests, we tried to tell people it is not important whether Babiš resigns. Yes, we wish it, but it is more important that you come and you say your no to what's going on. Because if it is only that come to the demonstration, we will be able to force this person to resign. So people come and the person doesn't resign. So people are disappointed and go slowly home. But we are trying to say that the result is not so important. What is really important is that you say no to unfairness, to injustice, that you stand for your values. And we have now with a concept which we call values of the Czech Republic, or values of the Czech Republic, which means that democracy is based on democratic institutions which keep it running, but deeper, it is based on certain democratic values. And if these values are absent in society, let's say the politicians don't have them, the institutions would break down, collapse. And what we think are the basic values is critical thinking, being nice to people, and become brave. And we said these are the three basic values of democracy, and you have to have all three of them, because if you have only two of them, it doesn't function. If you have people who have some ideals and who want to change everything and know even how it should be, because they are thinking in a critical way, they have knowledge but don't have courage, nothing will happen. If you have people who have a lot of ideals and have also the courage how to do it, but don't have knowledge and don't know how things run, then we know that the road to hell is paved with the best intentions. And you can have very smart people, that is the people we have in the government, who are not ashamed to implement their objectives and interests, but it doesn't help the society as a whole. So we need all these three values, and we urge people to come and to fight for these values and to demand them from their politicians.
Tanya, I'm sure you're going through the same process here. You're also calling people to show up, to speak up, to be brave, smart, and have the ideals. We started out by Marcy talking to us about the changes that participants in Maidan went through. You're in the middle of all this, do you see changes among yourself, among the circle you're working with, among the people in the streets, in the society at large?
Určitě ano. V sebe určitě. A
Certainly, I do observe changes within myself, but also changes in people that I'm meeting here in Bratislava. As Marci has said, it is kind of a corporeal experience that people will carry in themselves, and I believe that it is rather underestimated. I have to say that I do not give much thought to thinking about Kaliňák or Danko in Slovakia, but I am more interested in what the two of you have said. That is the way in which the anger with which people come to the square is transformed into something constructive. And this can be done when the square is organized in a manner in which people want to see themselves in society. This is why we took care to create space for mothers with baby carriages, for various categories of people. It is quite complicated, but we believe that this is important because we want to convey this experience to those people who are not coming to the squares either because they cannot, or they are fatigued, or they have some other reasons. And this is an important question for us. I see two solutions. One is the language that we're using. I have an impression that we often pretend to be heroes because I studied send this message to people is to try to send it to the politicians. I believe that we need a much stronger social state, not only the rule of law, but we have to think more about people who live in the shortage either of cultural or social means. Even though we live in a consumer society, this must be done. And I do not know how to do it because we are very egocentric, thinking about ourselves.
Marci.
I just wanted to jump in reference to what all three of my fellow panelists have said, and Tanya's been speaking about this provocation of these horrific murders and people coming on the streets, and Mikuláš has been talking about moc bez mocných, what is the power of the powerless? Can we go back to the power of the powerless? And something Radu said about seeing each other. We need to see each other. And that all connects quite intimately to why on the Maidan people spoke about this as the revolution of dignity. And in the States, people often said, well, why dignity? Why revolution of dignity? And I thought, well, this is a good moment to go back to Kant. And as Mikuláš, who the philosophers will know, the philosophy students will also know, it's a long-standing tradition in Central Europe that when things get too dark and creepy, you start saying zurück zu Kant, you start saying back to Kant. And I felt like this was a back to Kant moment. And so I was reminding, some Americans that, remember how Kant contrasts price and dignity. Whatever can be exchanged for something of equivalent value has a price. Whatever is beyond all exchange, and has no equivalent has dignity. Human beings do not have a price, human beings have dignity. You know, and the revolt on the Maidan, this revolt against what in Russian is called proizvol, was a refusal to be treated as an object as opposed to a subject. It was an insistence on being treated as a human being and not a thing. And this is what I meant when I talked about subjectivity and responsibility, that we are human beings and kind of responsible agents, you know, and not things. You know, and I think this recognition, this do we see one another? Do we recognize one another as subjects and not objects? You know, can we take some kind of agency? You know, can we take the responsibility that comes from being a human being and not a thing? I mean, I think that is the kind of transcendental, you know, and transcendent value of coming out on the streets, and I don't think that will ever go away.
Let's see if there's questions from the audience for these inspiring people. All of you look super inspired, so I'm sure you have questions. One there, one there. Yeah, oops, there you go. My fellow countryman, Martijn Lamberts. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Martijn Lamberts. I'm indeed from the Netherlands, working here in Bratislava at the embassy. Eric, the Norwegian colleague at the previous panel, he was saying that we moved from a time from political parties to movements, but that he still believed in political parties, and that's why he decided to work in there. You are all part of movements. Mm-hmm. And I have the feeling, at least in Slovakia, that many people have lost the trust in political parties. So I see also a reluctance of people who have been part of the movement to become politically active sorry, in political parties. So the question is, are you ready to become part of a political party or create your own to forward your agendas?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question, of course. Is there anybody who says no on this panel? No, I will not enter or create a political party? So, Tanya. You can never know. That leaves you. So could you reply to this dilemma, of course? I'm sure it's going on in all of your circles.
Well, I don't feel like today.
I do not want to say that I'm going to enter to a political party or to set up a party, but I believe that this is inevitable. But today, in my situation, I see my role as being professional and civic, but this may happen later on. What is important is to enable politicians to work freely and in a professional manner, but I believe that at the time being, this is not possible in Slovakia. And in my situation, it is impossible as well at this moment because of various reasons, including family, study, health, etc. But I believe that if we want to have good politicians, these politicians must have good people around them. And so this is what we have to do. We have to try to create this background for the politicians to be able to perform, but you can never say never. I also would like to follow up on it. Of course, people often write to us that you are pretending to be very smart, you write what you do not want to have, but you should set up a political party and pursue your agenda and create paradise on this earth. What I believe is that the political parties are necessary, and that at the end of the day, the changes are brought by the laws that are inspired by politicians. This is what we have to realize. But our role as a civic movement is to pursue certain values in society, to unify society around a certain objective. And we also have to exert pressure on the politicians to do their work. And this is very important because the moment we are going to do the same things that we are saying, but if we say that we have political ambitions, we would lose 80% of our sympathizers because they would look at us with some kind of suspicion, because they would think, okay, you're doing it because you want to enter politics, it is a political project, you basically fooled us into signing petition against Babiš, and now you want us to support you. But if we speak about specific things and not only about general objectives, we have an opportunity to unify one half of people living in the Czech Republic who just want one and the same thing, and without supporting one or the other political party. And this gives us tremendous strength, which we can use to exert pressure on the Prime Minister, who happens to be an undecent Prime Minister, in order to gain political strength to be able to convince him. But without politicians who will eventually put him down, nothing would happen. But either you have an enlightened and good politician who causes society to advance from top down, or you enable civil society to pursue a certain objective and to eventually force the politicians to carry it out. So basically, politicians do what people want. If they have to also abide by what people want. So this is more or less our strategy.
Thanks to both, because you two sides of the same approach. We have time for one more question, and I remember there was somebody over here. Can you put up your hand so our microphone can reach you? Back there on the third row from behind. Please introduce yourself.
Dobrý večer, volám se Marek Poláček.
Marek Polacek, I'm an activist for many years. First of all, I would like to thank all the panelists for what they do, which are, in my view, very important things. I have a question, two questions. One is direct democracy. We have heard it here. I believe that in Ukraine, we have heard that it is so important to have that people get some power, to take share in power, and I think that power and responsibility are the two sides of the same coin. What do you think? The elements of, to have direct democracy elements at the communal level, municipal level, that would be towns, municipalities, so the local issues will be decided by a larger participation of inhabitants. That would, in my view, teach them how to handle responsibility and power, and I think that later it would be then reflected in higher politics. So do you think it's a good idea to have more direct democracy at the communal municipal level? And the second question is, how is the situation in Romania today? Because I know that the prosecutor has lost her job, or something like that?
You will be able to answer on that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll answer first about Romania. Indeed, she was removed from the position, the lady who ran the National Anti-Corruption Direction. It's probably the most important success of Dragnea and of the Social Democrat Party. But she has been rehired by another prosecutor who's a pain in the ass for the corrupt. And now she coordinates the national strategy anti-corruption in another level of the Ministry of Justice. So she's still there doing the job, thanks to the popular support she has. And I'll answer also about direct democracy very quickly. It happened in Romania. The mass movements in the streets generated locally party structures who were involved in dealing with local problems, and then they coalesced in two major parties who are now emerged directly out of the street and who have about 25% of the votes. And there is another party, which is the traditional opponent of the PSD, of the PSD, which has about 25%. So in the next elections, I'm sure that the three of them together will make an alliance, and they will remove PSD from power. And I think this is what has to happen, to have direct democracy, to build what Max Weber called the community of feeling. He said that a nation is a community of feeling which generates its own structures. So this is what happened in Romania. Mass movements have made Romania into a community of feeling which generated its own parties, its own institutions, and which will eventually be Romania.
Beautifully said, as all of you have been so eloquent in talking about the cause. We have to finish because we will continue in this line of thought, of course. I just want to ask, thank you for bringing the knowledge and the courage and the ideals, and I can safely say also on your behalf, I think you added poetry and dignity to that. So thank you, Radu, Marci, Tanya, and Mikuláš. Thank you so much. I understood this was the first time you met, so I hope the future will bring more connections between these movements, because that's one very important element that we can add. We'll do a short break for everybody who needs to go to the toilet, get a drink or a cigarette, and also for our fantastic translators who are keeping up behind those windows. So see you in 10 minutes. Dear people, let's start again. Let's continue. And please, maybe somebody can call those irreverent crowd outside that we're going to start again. First we have 30 minutes with Professor Eriksson alone.
Alone?
And then you will join us. So in half an hour, can you survive that?
Yeah, I think I will.
Because
although it's very hot in here.
It's hot, it's true. But I'll tell you, it's even hotter.
Probably yes, because of the lamps. Yes, yesterday it was cold. But
no, first he'll explain his project, his research, and then Okay, I'm serious. I mean, up there everybody is already ready to go. Down here people are slow and I don't know what they're doing. More or less. That's adding to the tension.
It's keeping you on your toes.
Yeah, at one moment I thought, oops, yeah. Okay, we're continuing. I'm giving you a very short quote from our next guest. And we're very happy that he's here. He wrote, unlike what some said as the Berlin Wall fell down, history did not end. Quite on the contrary, it accelerated. About this acceleration on all levels of society, zooming in on big topics like ethnicity, nationalism, globalization, multiculturalism, with a helicopter view all over the world and attention for the details of every specific local situation, I'm proud that Central European Forum, after several attempts, has now seduced Professor Thomas Hulland Eriksson from Norway to join us here on stage.
Thank you. So, where should I sit?
Yeah, sit. In half an hour or so, we will be joined by Bojana Kef and Gabor Schein, who are waiting here on the front row. But first, Professor Eriksson, can I call you Thomas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, I should have.
Hello, yes. I want to ask you a very personal question before you start talking about the overheated world that we live in. Could you raise your right hand? So, you look in everything like a perfect, well-dressed, civilized professor, but you have this armband.
Oh, yes.
What does the armband mean?
Well, maybe it's part of my cosmopolitan identity. It was a gift given to me by a friend in China last year. And it's meant to bring, and I rather like it. I haven't been wearing this kind of stuff since I was a teenager, you know, but I rather liked it. And it's meant to bring happiness and good health. And at the time, I felt I could need both. So, and it helped. It works. Good. I'm happier now than I was before I started to wear it.
Okay. I was just curious because I know you travel all across the globe, so I guess this must have come from far away, and it did.
And it was also a personal gift.
Good. Now, Thomas Holland Eriksen is a professor of social anthropology at the University of Oslo. He is the president of the European Association of Social Anthropologists. He's also a member of the Norwegian Academy of Science and Letters. So this is one of the most famous anthropological minds on this planet, and he uses the planet as his research domain in order to prevent all of us to go up in flames in this overheated world. Can you tell us about... This is the most recent book, Overheating, an Anthropology of Accelerated Change. Now, you've been here for a few days. Yesterday you were having your own program in Banska Bystrica. Today you were here. You were listening to the earlier discussions. Can you try to introduce us into your thinking about the overheated world and end up in this part of the world?
I'll give it a try. Thanks a lot, Chris, and thanks for your introduction. I'll give it a try. So I'm going to try basically to say something general about overheating as a metaphor for talking about the contemporary era, and then try to zoom in, okay, on what's going on in this part of the world. So when you say overheating, I mean, the first time you say overheating, many people would think that this is just another project about climate change. You know, it's just about, you know, how we should, you know, use less, we should eat less meat, and we should fly less, and we should drive less, and so on and so forth. And that is part of the story, but it's not the whole story, because overheating is about speed. You know, in physics, heat and speed are two sides of the same coin. When something heats up, the molecules travel faster. So, in other words, it's about acceleration. Now, acceleration and speed have been part of modernity since the beginning, and it's been considered good. Speed and acceleration have been associated with progress and growth and development. I mean, think about transportation, for example. What a boon it was to the world economy when you could suddenly travel predictably by steamboat to America from Europe, rather than having to be, you know, victim to or subject to the vagaries of weather on the sailing ship. Or when the first transatlantic cable was laid in 1869. So you could transmit messages from London to New York within a few minutes rather than weeks. It was clearly, I mean, a great boost to the world economy. So speed, modernity, progress and development have gone hand in hand. Now I'm saying a number of things about the kind of speed that we're experiencing now. One of them is that since the early 1990s, we've experienced the kind of acceleration of acceleration. Things which went fast before move even faster now. The growth in world trade, the growth in energy use, the growth in the production of waste, you know, rubbish, plastic in the ocean, that sort of thing. And the change in global temperature, and I could mention a number. I haven't even mentioned information technology, the spread of the mobile phone, the internet, eventually the smartphone, and the social media. So and mobility, the way in which tourism has gone from, you know, a couple of 100 million international tourist arrivals a year in the late 1970s to more than 1.2 billion in 2017. It's been a six-time doubling in just a generation. So this is overheating. Things are happening faster, things are changing faster. That's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say is that it is as if it is out of control. There's no instance, there's no institution, there's no, as it were, power that can say that it's good now, it's enough. We should cool down. We should do things a bit more slowly. We're destroying the planet. We're destroying our own minds. It's not good for us. It's not making us happy. It's just making us efficient consumers who are undermining the conditions for our own survival. Because remember, this is a mining country. Coal mining has not been the main sort of mainstay of Slovakia, but there is lots of coal mining in this part of Europe. And we live in a society based on coal. It's a coal-based society. We have a lot to thank the coal for. The coal and the fossil fuels were our blessing for 200 years. It was the salvation of humanity for 200 years and brought us this wonderful modernity that we are now enjoying. But what was our salvation for 200 years is slowly turning into our damnation because of climate change and pollution. And it's very hard to get our heads around this. And that is also overheating. That's another important aspect of overheating. How can we deal with this loss of a narrative of progress that we have relied on for 200 years? Okay? So that's another important dimension. But, okay, just one final thing before I very quickly say something about this part of the world. If you rub your hands together really quickly, like this, okay? Yeah, which we do at this time of the year, quite a bit in this part of the world. They warm up. If you could do it incredibly fast, they would eventually burn up. But you can't, because you have an inbuilt thermostat, which tells your body that it's good now, it's fine. You can stop, because you're warm, okay? You don't want to turn into carbon or to charcoal. The danger with overheating in the realms of finance, the environment, identity, and so on, is that there is no instance, there's no thermostat which can stop it. So it's out of control. In fact, the Italian translation of this book is called Fuori controllo, out of control, which I think is a good translation of the concept. Now, about Central Europe. There's a lot, okay, just two things, and then we can continue our conversation. Two things I'd like to say about that is one overheating effect is a sense of powerlessness. I'm being overrun. There are people who are taking decisions which affect my life, and they never asked me for my opinion. Those people could be in my own local government, they could be in Brussels, or it could be powerful global corporations. And they're more and more distant every year. So it's harder and harder to get in touch with them. You don't even know where to send the email if you want to voice a complaint. Whereas, I mean, in the 19th century, you'd mount a strike against the capitalist because you knew who it was. Now we no longer know who the capitalist is. That's one thing. Another thing is that... In between, one question. Sorry. Your own speech is quite accelerated. I know, yeah. And we don't want to burn up our translators. Yeah. So could you... I'm sorry, yeah. It's, I've managed to slow down in a number of areas, but somehow not in the field of speech. Just one final sentence, and then we'll move on about Central Europe. One is the resentment that we have spoken about. I mean, you spoke about this, you discussed this earlier, the resentment against the state, the feeling that society and the state are not really on the same page, and that decisions are being taken which are my voice was not being heard. Maybe I could say as what I liked. Maybe I have full freedom of expression, but I'm not being listened to. Nobody cares what I say. The people in Washington, in Westminster, in London, wherever, Brussels. So Brexit, Trump, that sort of phenomenon. Clearly overheating effects in my mind. And the second is that one of the aspects of rubbing your hands together is not only that they warm up, but that they also create friction. So overheating creates friction between the different scales, between the different temporalities, between the different ways in which we relate to the outside world. And this is also part of the story about the recent rise of identity politics in Central Europe.
Exactly. And I mean, if the mind of a world traveler is coming at you at this speed, you need some time to slow down and break it down. I'm sure the same goes for you. You wrote something in the introduction to An Overheated World, which I would like you to quote, and it is this paragraph right here.
The one in the middle?
Yes, this one.
Okay. All right, thank you. The steady acceleration of communication and transportation of the last two centuries. Read it
slowly.
Yep. Of the last 2 centuries has facilitated contact and made isolation difficult, and is weaving the growing global population ever closer together, without erasing cultural differences, local identities, and power disparities. Indeed, as decades of research on collective identification has shown, intensified identity management and the assertion of group boundaries is a likely outcome of increased contact and the perceived threat to group integrity. The standardization of identity, witnessed, for example, in nationalism and religious revivalism, is a feature of modernity, not of tradition, although it is frequently dressed in traditional garb. Yeah. Yeah, well, that was reasonably half sensible, I guess.
It was totally sensible and totally on point in this part of Europe as well, I think, because we started out today with Eric, who is in politics now in your own country after having survived Utoya in Breivik. We spoke with the organizers of the protests in Romania, Czech Republic, and here. All of them voiced the wish to reach out to the people who feel isolated, left behind. Because otherwise they will vote for the Trumps and the Orbans and the Brexits. But you point out something very important here. The acceleration of the world, on the surface it looks like it connects everybody across the planet, but if you go into specific localities, it actually produces, as you say here, intensified identity management and the assertion of group boundaries, which is exactly the opposite of the so-called interconnected planet. Can you describe us or give us examples of how you see that? Groups moving together, creating their own boundaries because they feel lost and left behind?
Absolutely, and I think this is a sentiment that we need to take really seriously, and not just treat with contempt and disdain, because it's a situation which is felt for good reasons by many people, that the world is moving really fast and nobody cares about me. You know, I live in an old mining community. The mine was closed down decades ago, and nobody has, even no politician from the capital has even visited the area and suggested ways in which we could create the future and hope and so on. So that's a real problem, a real phenomenon. And there is a center-periphery problem here. The periphery doesn't have to be geographically peripheral. It can also be inside the city. But you could say that there is a dialectic, or there's a dynamic relationship between, on the one hand, well, as you pointed out, the free flow of everything across the world, you know, the growth of Chinese trade and the internet and the social media and tourism and whatnot, and the use of the English language, which enables this global conversation, which is fantastic, by the way, which makes it possible for us to have a global conversation. On the one hand, and on the other hand, the call for a return to tradition, for purity, for boundaries, for getting, you know, all of these contaminating influences out. So it's no coincidence that we live at a time where, at the same time, there is more openness, there's more mobility and more communication and more learning across boundaries. And on the other hand, there is an obsession with building walls. You know, you have the Israel-Palestine wall, you have Trump's dream of a wall against Mexico, you have all of these little walls around gated communities in class-divided cities where the rich are so afraid of the poor that they have to have 4-meter walls, you know, with glass on top in order to feel secure. Yeah. So there's a seesaw, we're trying to find a balance between, on the one hand, purity and boundaries, and flows and impurity. Yeah.
I think when I listen to you, it sounds like you're describing a situation in Central Europe, but as a researcher, as an anthropologist, as a traveler, do you see this same phenomenon happening all over?
Thanks for your question. I think that's a very important perspective, because we all know our own society pretty well, and we all think it's unique. And yes, it is. All societies are unique up to a certain point. But then there are also these global similarities, patterns, the same tendencies affecting people everywhere. And that was the premise for this research project, which involved quite a few researchers, you know, went around the world and studied in the Philippines, in Sierra Leone, in West Africa, in Peru, in South America, and so on. And we found some of the same patterns everywhere. So the feeling that there is a growing gap between my community and the people and the decisions that are being taken is fairly universal. The discourse around purity and boundaries versus contamination, impurity and flows is also quite universal. But it's being expressed in different ways. You know, in the Philippines, you have this mad president who thinks that if he can only kill everybody who's involved with drugs, it will be a good society. So those are the Muslims of the Philippines. Well, not really. They have Muslims, real Muslims in southern Philippines, but you see what I mean. The same as Moroccans in Amsterdam. I mean, if you can only get these people out, everything will be fine. In Australia, there's an obsession with invasive species. With the cane toad, with South African bushes, with trees and plants and animals which are not supposed to be there. They didn't care much about those 50 years ago, so why do they care now? So because there is a general fear that we are losing control. We need to regain control of our boundaries. And I think that has to be taken very seriously. And we need to think about how to balance openness and control and autonomy and control of boundaries.
Now you described fear of communication, fear of contamination. Yeah. You described the reflex of purity, of building walls, of building homogeneous societies. You describe them as, let's say, the result or the leftover of the acceleration. But could it also be true that this acceleration, including the technological, including the economical harmonization across the world, it's that this side effect is actually built into that acceleration?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
So it's not like an accidental result, but it's actually an aim.
Well, at least it's a direct effect. Absolutely, it's a direct effect of acceleration. Just as you might say that nostalgia is a result of change, of modernity, that you start yearning for something that may have existed in the past, which probably didn't exist in the past, but you have ideas about it having existed in the past, and you want that to return, because then life was simple, and the world was readable, it was legible, and you could feel at home in it. And nowadays, things are changing so fast, and nobody asks me for my opinion, and who can I blame, and what can I do, you know? So at least I can build a wall around my own little identity, and hope that it holds. But it's not going to hold. I mean, we're going to find a way of swimming in this, these murky waters of 21st century modernity. We have to make peace with diversity. That was a lesson that Norway should have learned after the terrorist attack. That ethnic cleansing is clearly not the way to go, because then we're going to get more of this kind of stuff. So we must learn to live with impurity and with modernity, as Habermas spoke of, as an unfinished project. But you're absolutely right. And nostalgia is fine, you know, as long as you don't use it to produce hatred, suspicion, and the exclusion of others. So what characterizes the new populist movements, from Trump to Duterte, and I haven't even mentioned Narendra Modi in India, who's a very dangerous politician and not very well known in Europe, is that they thrive on the suspicion of others and on creating division, right? Which responsible politicians don't. Because they try to be everybody's leaders, and they try to make compromises. So we should be wary of this. And this is also these are also overheating effects, because remember, in this incredibly complex world where things are changing so fast, in the realm of technology, trade, migration, you know, I'm a migration researcher, among other things, and my feeling was some years ago that I just went out for a coffee, and when I returned to my office, the statistics had changed, you know, so I had to update my article. So things are changing really fast. In this kind of world, there's a huge demand for simple answers to complex questions, and as intellectuals, we should resist that. We should insist that complex questions need complex answers. There's no easy way out. We have to muddle through.
This was actually mentioned yesterday too by Nathalie Nougarede in the conversation. She said, she's a journalist for The Guardian. She said, if there's anything that I would wish for right now is not to simplify things that are complex. And a lot of things are complex, so let's be complex. Before we ask our next guest on stage, I just want to ask you, through your anthropological eye, how did you look at the three activists on stage just now who are mobilizing the protests in Romania, Czech Republic and Slovakia? Yeah. What was your impression to begin with?
Well, I think it's very promising that we get this kind of social movement, that there is a social engagement, and that there is a feeling that something important is at stake when it comes to democratic values. And one could also imagine a situation where the engagement expands into an alternative vision for society, because what we really need now is a new story about progress, which does not destroy the planet, which does not lead to huge inequalities, which is not based on the financialization of the economy. So there's a great promise there in a society which refuses to do as it's told, and which stubbornly insists on upholding some sacred values to do with common decency. So I think it's incredibly promising, and I wish we had something similar in the part of the world where I live. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because we started the afternoon with Eric, who chose the path through the political institutions. Yes. Totally valid, legitimate. Absolutely. But he's not in the streets. No. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and the problem is, I mean, you know, we're probably going to talk more about that in a minute, but one of the recipes for populism is really to have arrogant politicians who are too distant, too aloof, and who don't listen, and who are in cahoots with powerful financial interests, which are abstract, which are virtual, which are invisible, but which govern much of our world. You know, the Google, Amazon kind of world, but also the world of financial banking. So you need a society that stands up against this and says that, be concrete, be tangible, and talk about a world that we can recognize and that we can experience, and not just something abstract and virtual. And don't say Tina, don't say there is no alternative. There is always an alternative.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, gathering thousands of people of the streets, that's actually almost the oldest tool of protest in our history. And still, every time again, every generation again, it proves to work.
Yeah, but often it doesn't work immediately. And often it has been written off as being futile and a waste of time, you know, because nothing happens in the first couple of days. But when people persist, as they did here, I mean, during the Velvet Revolution, you persist for days and weeks and even months. Sooner or later, it's going to have effects. Yeah. And when it grows, from a few hundred to thousands to millions. And this kind of thing can also happen. Yeah. So we can only hope that similar kind of revolt will happen elsewhere, but only if people have a good alternative in place. We don't want to descend into anarchy, do we?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, this seems like a good time to invite our next guests on the stage together with you. Božena Kev, writer from Poland, and Gabor Schein, a writer from Hungary. Under your applause. Božena, start with you. Poet, essayist, film critic, journalist, feminist activist, researcher at Polish Academy of Science, literary researcher at Jewish Historical Institute, and lecturer in gender studies at the Warsaw University. It's amazing you actually had time to be here. But you did.
In fact, I'm a poet and a writer. But it doesn't supply me enough money to survive, and that's why I have those other jobs.
There must be, I accept that totally. There must be more than that
half
too.
Joke.
Yeah. And it's actually a pity that we cannot speak with you now really as a poet.
Okay. No, it's
because
okay.
this is not a conversation about poetry.
No,
this is a conversation about a world that's accelerating, as you've noticed. If you listen to Thomas Eriksson, do you think the phenomena that he's describing globally, that they are valid to the society that you live in?
Yes, from this point of view, how to say, the highest possible point of view, yes, yes. But of course, I'm living in Poland. I'm not looking from this point of view. But sometimes, yes, because I'm trained as a philosopher. So it's a kind of natural for me also to have this perspective. And I'm a universalist in this enlightenment sense of the word. So yes, but from the other hand, of course, in great emotions from time to time. Not every time, because I wouldn't survive that in Poland, having to do with what I have to do every day. Yes, because I'm living in a country which looks now like it was never anything like enlightenment there. Nothing like that. And, well, partially that's true. I mean, enlightenment wasn't very deeply rooted, something in, era in Poland, but somehow it was. And in fact, I'm living in a country which is back in its 17th century, which was very anarchistic, rooted in Catholic Church, just being victorious on Counter-Reformation, because they were Protestants in Poland, against, I think, maybe a very popular opinion that they were not. They were, and in fact, quite big number, about 20% of nobility. And living in a situation when there is war between history and mythology. History and mythology is very important. This is very important. And those points really take me back into the history, to the places I don't want to be. But from this very high point of view, that is true. The form is like that in Poland. And maybe I was naive in the 90s, and maybe not, because 90s in Poland, they were full of hope, like probably in all countries of this part of Europe. But still, we have a victorious Catholic Church which is more tribal than Christian. Yes, this is a church of nationalistic, tribal nationalistic ideology, the first, which is going along with politics of the same kind. So, and it was in 90s also. So, as a feminist, I can say only that women in Poland lost a lot. Yes, we have anti-abortion law, which is horrible. So
you're talking about Poland as a country that didn't skip the Enlightenment. It didn't even reach the Enlightenment, or it's almost as if it never happened.
It's maybe it didn't skip, but it looks now for majority like it never happened. Yes.
Yeah. You're talking about, let's say, historical, or Poland as a country dominated by a narrative somewhere between history and mythology.
Yeah.
You talk about the church.
Yeah.
You talk the church, a tribal nationalist ideology.
Yeah.
You haven't even mentioned Holocaust?
No, because I had only 3 minutes or 2, I don't know. I will.
Of course.
I will, because it's very important, yeah.
You've written about how the society in Poland has not been able to work through that memory and experience, instead replacing it by a kind of official narratives that makes the Polish citizens look good.
Yes, because the official title or motto of this discussion was the new hatred.
Mm-hmm.
So I was thinking about that, and yes, I would say in most important items in Poland, there's the first items for politics and everything. Neoliberal politics, economy, politics, something that just Professor Eriksson said, or rather capitalism with no mercy, let's say like that, with no mercy, and with nothing socialistic in it, because everything which is socialistic have some connection with social, and everything is stupid like that. Yes, I'm just mimicking this very common way of thinking in Poland. So this is the third one, and I think that the general frame in Poland for hatred to everything and everybody who are different is have roots in anti-Semitism, Polish anti-Semitism, and more precisely in war between mythology and history, which means that from the year 2000, where it was published in Poland, a very important book of the Polish Jewish historian who lives in the United States, happily for him, called Neighbors.
Jan Gross.
Jan Tomasz Gross. And before him also, but it wasn't so very important, the others had not as much success. The amount of articles, books, text on real attitudes of Poles toward Jews during the Second War is huge. There is a huge knowledge that you can't say, well, I know nothing about that, because if you like to know anything about that, it's very easy. It's very easy. And about the official, there is like something that I can call the official spell, a magical spell. Something repeated from, I don't know, from the very end of the Second War is like, it's going like that. Poles do everything they could to help Jews, but it was death penalty for that. But even so, we have still the greatest number of trees for righteous in Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, which is absolute mythology, absolute mythology, in every sentence.
Yeah, and the way you describe it, this society will never be able to move on if it doesn't, get to terms with this question. My question for you for now, and then we'll move on, is: are you talking about new hatred here, or are you talking about old hatred that bought a new jacket?
Both, because this pattern, in fact, the facts from these new books written by thousands of Polish, not only historians, they are mostly people of culture, And as I said, the access to this knowledge is quite easy. And it's happened that in March this year, it was the 15th anniversary of the March 68, which was completely different spring of the 68. It was the expelling of the rest of the Jews from Poland. So it showed up that, well, yes, some amount of this knowledge is was absorbed. So every weekly, for example, was about that. But I want to say that this structure, anti-Semitic structure of a hatred, is solid base for any other form of hatred. So Islam is not excluding this one. It's rather a very good ground for every other form of fear
it's
and
the model,
hatred.
it's the base.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you. Gabor Stein, writer, poet, literary critic, translator. You live in Budapest. You're a professor at the Hungarian Literary History Institute of Eötvös Loránd University. So again, a man of letters who's dropped into this conversation about an accelerating world and the new hatred that might be a product of that. First, same question as for Bojana Kef. Could you relate to Thomas Erikson's story when you're looking at the society you live in today?
Yes, of course. Accelerating means for me an adventure. It means that people need a slowly and safe life. And it means that they are annoyed about this acceleration. It is for me also very important which experiences people do have with accelerations, with changings. People can have a positive experience with it. It's a win. Or people can have a negative experience with it. It's a loss. Maybe the Hungarian society could have not a specific, but his own experiences with changings. It's a very negative experience. In the 20th century, the Hungarian society, the different parts of the Hungarian society, because even because of the experiences of the 20th century, I cannot speak about the unified Hungarian, so-called Hungarian society. But, you know, I even told on my grandmother, who was born in 1911, and she had a long life. She died at 96, so she died 2007, and she survived 2 world wars. The second one, as a Jew, was to surviving. The second one it was just very difficult. She survived 3 revolutions, many system changings in Hungary, very many technical changings. Of course, I can remember she was very much afraid to go upstairs with an elevator, as I was 7, you know. And the Hungarian society had an experience that every changing is a loss. It means they are very much afraid of it, and they need very hard a leader who can save the society against this changing. It means also, for me, and it is also a very important point for me, that the common imagination of a country the common fantasy of a country is just very, very important in which kind of politics they can use. The imaginations of Hungary, and I say it's so-called Hungary because there are many Hungaries. So it is a very much feudalistic kind of imagination. They need a leader who can save them against the changing. They need an idol of a father who, with it, they can avoid to take the relationship with, for their own life. And this tool of reacting is completely gives a completely incapability to give good answers on that. And another thing that in this common way of fantasy, how they want to save their identity. Identity is for me a completely empty word. We don't have any identity. It is they need for that, because it's empty, they need for that an enemy. Mm-hmm. Something who is different. Jews are the mirrors. Yeah. And in Hungary, it is just very important because through the First World War, actually not through the First World War, just because of the Hungarian politics before, on the end of the 19th century, Hungary became a very homogenic country. We do have only other nationalities, just gypsies and a little minority of Germans, Slovaks, Jews, which are not a national minority. Hungary is a very much homogenic country, and it means that they don't have the mirror, and they need it. They need a virtual enemy.
This is very, very essential what you say. Society needs the other, needs the mirror, needs the Jews, the Muslims, the Roma, whatever.
We need the other because the otherness comes before the selfness.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Let's return to you, Thomas Eriksen. This is complex material. I hope you're following, because it's also, both of you are very eloquent in describing the sad shape of dominant part of your society. Gabor Stein, Bojana Kev describes country as in a struggle between history and mythology. Mm-hmm. Gabor Stein says in Hungary, the dominant narrative is every change is a loss. Mm-hmm. Now, could you try to fit in these stories into your helicopter view? Mm-hmm. Because I'd say every change is a loss, sure. I can imagine you working at the university, no, not you. Mr. Orban sitting at his desk, complaining that internet is slow today. So internet's actually a change for the good for him. But he's building a wall against refugees, because that is a change he doesn't want. So there's changes going on different levels. Yeah. No?
Yeah, I think there's a big sort of sorting, sorry.
One sentence for that. Mr. Orban is not annoying through the changing. He used them for his power. I don't want to speak about Mr. Orban because it's an empty name.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, but I think
thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah. But there are a couple of things. I mean, I think your point about identities being relational is really well taken, and it's very important that all identities are contrasts with what they are not, which means that whoever you see yourself as depends on who you're comparing yourself with at this very moment. I mean, when I'm with women, I become a man, right? If I'm with people from Africa, I become European. And if I socialize with economists, I become an anthropologist, no matter what country they come from. So this obsession with the ethnic and national identities that we are witnessing now really needs to be addressed. And we should remember in this part of Europe that only 100 years ago, that sort of thing mattered, but not in the same way as it does now, not in an exclusive way. This was a cosmopolitan crossroads. I mean, Pressburg was a city where people lived side by side, and they didn't see that diversity as being a problem, almost like in Hindu India, you know, where difference is not seen as a problem, but rather as an enrichment, because you can do something that I can't, and we complement each other. So there are these ways of thinking about identity as well. And I think that many men and women see the opposite gender in the same way, okay? That it would have been very boring, you know, to have this world with only one gender, sort of. So in other words, there's a complementarity. So that is the positive take on diversity, which is crucial in this day and age of building walls and obsession with purity and the fear of the kind of complexity which is created by these overheating processes. So I think that's one sort of way to begin to think about identity, that we insist that people have many identifications. We identify with many facets of who we are. So whoever you see yourself in the mirror in the morning depends on your mood, you know? It depends on what time of the year it is. It depends on whether you had a good sleep. And that's your identity. It shifts. It's chameleon-like. Yeah.
One sentence. What's the root of the identity? What's the root of the imagination and panical paranoia to have an identity? This is, I think, to want to be different. So it's a thinking which is based on differences. But we could have another way of thinking, which would be based on similarities, and it gives a new kind. It would give us a new kind of identity. And a very important experience was for me of the last public discussion that we are similar in different countries. And that's just very important, I think, instead of this paranoia of differences.
An identity based on similarities. And you're not talking about that we're all users of Facebook. You're talking about more essential things that we have in common. Yeah.
I mean, all human beings have something in common. I think that's incredibly important when we think about these things. But one thing that I think we should address is we need to go back in history sometimes. We need to go sideways to see how people solve these issues in other communities, in other societies. To stimulate our own intellectual and political imagination is crucial. That we know something about our own society, but we should also know something about others. So what was it that happened when class politics was replaced with identity politics? You know, the problem is not the collective identity as such, as Claudia Magris writes beautifully about in his book about the Danube, I mean, which is a river flowing through this very city, that being a fascist doesn't mean that you love your 19th century national poets, or the place you grew up, or your parents, or whatever. But it's loving all these things and not understanding that other people who live in a different place, they love their parents, their 19th century poets, their hometown, and they're just as good as you. That's the root of fascism, not being tolerant. So the shift to exclusionary identity politics is what should be addressed there. And what happened to class politics as a marker of identity?
You wanted to respond, yeah?
Well, yes. So I have a question or a doubt, because I do understand what you said about that you have a mirror in something that is different. That it also have to be a kind of condition. I don't know how of what a cultural condition, economical condition, I don't know, that you can use that mirror because you know, Poland before war was the nation of, from my head, so it could be not very precise, about 28 millions, including 6 millions of Ukrainians, 3.5 millions of Jews, about 500,000 of Germans, some Lithuanians, some Belarusians, and other ethnicities. And on the brink of the Second War, Polish nation, the dominant nation, was dominant, after all. Polish, let's say, Catholic nation was in their majority, don't say everybody, but majority, anti-Semitic, and Ukrainians generally hate Poles for being suppressed. Lithuanians to this day have some resentments for Poles, and so on, and so on, so on. So it was a lot of mirrors, only not possibility to use them, not possibility in your mindset to use those mirrors. Yes? So what is the condition when we can use the mirrors as the mirrors? Right?
Yes,
and
good question. If the mirrors are there. Now, I want to go back to Thomas Eriksson's introduction, because the title of the panel is New Hatred. You already said we're talking about new hatred, old hatred. Yeah. They're both. Yeah. The interesting thing is, you gave us this high-speed introduction about an accelerating world, an overheating world. This is a 21st century phenomenon that you're describing. We start talking, it's not a 21st century phenomenon, but as you described it, since, let's say, the 90s, it accelerated in double speed. Now we're talking about situation in society in Poland and Hungary. Within 10 minutes, we're talking about 20th century, 19th century. This, how do we explain this? How does the question of Thomas Eriksson about the results, the products of acceleration in 21st century lead us immediately into the past? Do you get my question?
Well, there's the old and there's the new, I guess. There is the old and there's the new. I mean, one generic problem about using history for contemporary political projects is that everything has happened in the past, so you can use the history almost for everything. But not quite, because as Božena Kev very importantly points out, there are traumas in European history that have not been dealt with properly. In some countries, they're more skillful at dealing with these traumas than in others. In my own country, where we hardly had any Jews at all, there's a current heated controversy around the resistance movements, negligence of the Jews. They didn't really care. They just wanted to get the Germans out and that sort of thing. So we have our traumas. Just like in the United States, you have the trauma of genocide of Native Americans and slavery, which are also not being addressed properly. So clearly, history comes back to us, and we can't really get rid of it because it's part of the narrative of our species. It's our story. It goes back. But at the same time, there is something which is new as well. And the old becomes new, and the old is being repackaged, or the new is being repackaged to make it appear as old. Just like, I mean, if you take Yugoslavia 25 years ago, when war erupted there, these problems had already been solved. You know, in 1946, the problems have been solved, and suddenly they re-emerge as if they'd never been gone. So clearly this was a result of political manipulation of historical symbols, which they used in very sort of cunning and strategic ways to push the kind of buttons that might generate hatred. And we should be wary of that. And therefore, I think what Gabor Schein says about similarities, that all humans have something in common, the universality of humanity, it's so important these days, that we're all in the same boat together.
Yeah, let's speak about the future. I would be very happy if a Hungarian would sit here in the last debate and not in that. It would mean that in Hungary there is a new political movement which can change the political life, and there was nobody from Hungary, and I think. The thing is that if you want to change the common fantasy, the common imagination of a country, therefore you have to give them new symbols. I would say new myths, which can help them to be a winner in the history. In history means changing, and. It deals, of course, with the past, because you have to know how are the symbols, the way of imaginations of people, and it has a very important function, because I just mentioned that there is no one Hungary, there are many Hungaries. The question is, what can bring the many Hungaries together? You need for that symbols, political symbols.
Could you imagine something that might work?
It's a difficult question, because I'm a writer, and during the time I'm working on a novel, it is my work to give beneath the imaginations coming from the past and go through the future. And in the structure of a novel, it works. But how can you move it? I mean, in the politics, I'm not a politician, but I write about politics, about essays. I mean. And it is just very hard. It is because you need for that channels. You need for that. I would say here a very old word, intelligence. And you know, in the countryside of Hungary, there is no intelligence. There are no teachers. There are no doctors. The churches are completely empty, and it's a lot, because most part of the priestess they tell the people just stupid things. There are no channels. There is no media which can play this role of the channeling forms of thinking. You know, I think the first thing is in Hungary to recreate the channels.
Because, as you're saying, the many Hungaries, or the many identities in a society in general, do not have to be homogenized and dictated from above. You could recognize the many identities, the many Hungaries. You could imagine symbols that stress the similarity instead of the differences. But in your society, in Hungary today, the space for that imagination has been
destroyed.
Yeah,
and this emptiness is filled up with this empty name, with the name of Mr. Orbán. He is the creator of this crisis, and he uses it for his power, which gives him much more money than you can imagine. And that's it. He is a creator of the situation, and I think every leader, every populist leaders are just creations of the situation. We don't have to fight against them. We do have to fight against this political emptiness. We do have to have new imaginations about our similarities.
Yes. And what you're talking about, I mean, what you're describing, it's almost Orwellian in the sense that there are certain thoughts that cannot be thought anymore because you run such risks by thinking those very thoughts that you should stop doing it. And even in a liberal, open, peaceful, and filthy rich society like the one where I live, we feel that increasingly. So that in the 1990s, people like myself who defended diversity and minority rights, we were denounced as naive. They spoke, well, you're so naive, you don't understand that these people are going to destroy your culture. Whereas in the last few years, increasingly, we're spoken of as traitors and are receiving threats. And that is a small but important nuance, isn't it, between being naive and being a traitor. So threatening language is becoming more common, even in that peaceful country where nothing's going to happen, you know, to me. But still, you have the feeling that there is something rather poisonous in the air these days, and not just in countries like Hungary.
Yeah. Božena?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Because I wanted to ask Gabor, you said there is no identity. Identity is an empty word. Okay, maybe we use word identity in different meanings, but I would say it by Gombrowicz, who is my beloved writer. Maybe I don't know Witold Gombrowicz. Maybe I don't know who I am, but if you tell me just the opposite, I'm protesting, right? So maybe this is something, maybe Orban is an empty name, but maybe this emptiness is full of something. Well, I don't know. Is full of the, I don't know, identifications, hopes, and so on, of the millions of other, empty names? I'm not very sure of it. And what I want to say is that I absolutely agree that we need a narrative about the progress. Oh, it's very. I have to tell that the word progress in Poland is connected, I don't know how it is in Hungary, probably Norwegian is a different story, is so much connected with the socialist era that we do not use the Polish word for progress, which is postęp, but progress. Just like that, as a new word, a neutral one, but it still means more or less the same, more or less, because rather more, it means a progress in economic life. And maybe I just, it's not my merit, so I can say that it is. I just discussed with my partner, Jarosław, who's sitting here, what was the mistake made by these years by the UA politics, that
the UA politics?
UA politics, I mean, yes.
EU politics?
Yes, EU, yes, European Union, so, I'm sorry. Politics that we are not integrated as Europeans, yes, and just contrary, we are drifted to the nationalistic identities. And we agreed that the aim was the economic growth, and the tool was neoliberal policy, while probably the aim should be a welfare state. Yes, and the tool should be more socialistic, liberal policy with a strong accent on, I don't know how to do that and how it should be done, integration of the different nations on a different level and different history as Europeans. And then maybe we could build a new story. I mean, a project is always a story also, yes, about the future.
But new story, new project.
Yeah.
Progress in a human meaning, not in an economical meaning.
Not only, and not this shape of...
Requires, that echoes what Gabor Steiner said, requires to step towards a higher level where you are communicating with others, not to stay stuck inside your own identity, narrative.
Well, yes, and I absolutely don't know how to do that, especially at the point we are. I mean, we as Poland and, oh no, so Hungary, France on the brink of Le Pen and so on, so on.
Thomas?
One of the unfortunate things here was that if you look at this sort of the convergence of different tendencies in history, is that the realization of global market capitalism, or neoliberalism as it's sometimes called, it coincided with the liberation of Central and Eastern Europe from communism. So the realization of the Reagan-Thatcher vision of the world came alive. And became the only game in town at the same time. And as a result, one never really got a chance to build an alternative welfare state, particularly in as much as the European Union, which to me was always a project of identity and politics, and which somehow was turned into a pure market project. You know, it was all about marketization and about profits, where the economy suddenly was seen as a means of generating huge profits for already filthy, absurdly rich people, instead of satisfying human needs. Had we instead looked at the economy as a means of satisfying human needs across Europe, we might have got a very different picture now, also at the ideological level. So I agree with you, it was a missed opportunity. But it's still not too late. We can do it again.
It's still not too late.
One more point about the laws changing, the system changing. I mean, 89 and after that. One of the main experience with this changing was that in Hungary and overall in this region, that many people become very deeply poor. In Hungary, it is a country with 10 million inhabitants, circa 3.5 or 4 million people are deeply poor. If you make a trip to the eastern part of the country, it is like you would make a trip in India or in South America. It means also that all these people are falling out of the political nation. They don't vote. They don't have any experiences about democracy. They want to live, they want to survive every day by day. That's everything. And that's the point, I think. Before we think about identity and new politics and so on, we should make a politic which can bring all these people back to the political nation, which can build all these lives, build new up. It means also that the children, they are born in these regions, in these families, they don't have any chance they don't have chances for nothing, and that's the point, I think, and that would be the focus of another politics, and just a joke for that, progress. It means Hungarian haladás. Maybe that would be the reason why the political imagination of the Hungarians is so pessimistic, because haladás, the first syllabus hal, it means to die. but they don't have anything with each other.
So the space for imagination has been destroyed. The space for future for many, many people in the country. You're so, yes. Okay, let's go to the audience, because your analysis is chilling and sharp. It fits in a unexpectedly accurate way in the analysis you've been making. Are we going to solve all of this on the final evening of the Central European Forum right now? I'm not sure. Let's see what we're getting from the audience first.
There's one over there.
Mike, yes.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Susanna. I was listening attentively, and I would like to ask Mr. Professor Eriksen, because he was telling us the situation as he sees it. I would like to ask him to also prescribe a recipe. What would he suggest? Because also his speech, the pace of it suggested that he's very much a part of it, that his helicopter point of view is, in a way, influence. You know what I mean. Then, thanks to the poet, we slowed down a little bit. But, well, my question is, what is the recipe for this? If we have a society that is overheated, right? Is it the interconnectivity? Is it the looking for the sense of belonging on the common boat that you've been mentioning? Or what is it? Or is it becoming antisocial? Is it becoming alternative to the society? Is it asocial? What is the alternative? That's one question. Maybe you can also tell your Polish and Hungarian points of view.
That's already a huge question, yeah?
And the second one is, do you have a book that you could sell us tonight?
Which would actually give you the answer you're asking for. Can you take that microphone?
Okay, yes, I'll try to be as brief as I can. Well, regarding the recipe, haven't you noticed how recently politicians no longer sell hope, they sell fear? You know, they tell us not, vote for me and things are going to be great. They say, vote for me or else. The Muslims will take over, the neo-Nazis will take over, the climate is going astray, etc. So they sell suspicion and fear, and they sow the seeds of suspicion and of pessimism, which is not a good way of going about things. So I think what we really need is a positive vision, a collective positive vision. Because in the lack of a positive collective vision, in my country, which is richer than any society has ever been, okay, in history, people are complaining more than they ever did. They complain about everything, and they complain not least about immigrants who've never done them anything wrong. I mean, immigrants stay in their parts of the city and they basically have jobs and pay their taxes and behave decently. So you sit around and you're a consumer and you complain about people you don't like because you don't have a project. You don't feel like you're part of history. You don't feel that you're part of something important. I believe that some periods in history make us bigger than we are. The Second World War made some people bigger than they were because they were fighting absolute evil. Right? So they were making sacrifices and they were risking their lives. And there are also some periods that they make people very small. And in my part of the world, we live in such a period right now, where it's consumerism and suspicion of others. So we need something big and hairy and which can mobilize enthusiasm. And it has to be green, it has to be modern, it has to be humane and cosmopolitan and concerned with social justice. And it has to entail slowing down, cooling down, and scaling down.
Does the society have an internal thermostat that the hands have not to burn, as you were saying in the beginning, the metaphor with the burning hands?
Yeah, that thermostat has to come from below and inside. We can't rely on the forces above us, because that's corporate capitalism, which is going to continue to overheat the world until it burns up. So it has to come from below, the social movements, you and me.
We are the thermostat. Yes. Okay.
I would come here one step before. I think the most important experience of people is not the fear, it is the irritation about all the changing and so on. There is two answers on irritations. The one answer is, okay, you have to have fear about your irritation. It's an answer which you don't have to have any new ideas to say. Your answer could be fear. This is how you can handle your irritation. This is what you can feel. You don't know what you are feeling. This is what you are feel. For example, in Hungary there are no migrants, but everybody has fear from migrants. Everybody, people didn't see any migrants in a Hungarian village. It was many occasions that people, for example, in a Hungarian village, people saw a woman coming from the hairdressing in a hair cart. And people called the policeman. There is a migrant, and she was just a woman coming from the hairdressing. Another way could be, another answer would be on irritation, the hope, because the crisis is a situation which gives you the occasion to make things better. And this is just very hard. How could you give a positive answer on irritation? And I think that would be the job of politicians. That would be the job of politicians. And if they don't want to give positive answers on irritation, then the societies has to press them to give new answers, or we have to give new answers, and and therefore I would be just very happy if somebody from Hungary would sit in the last public debate
next year
instead of mine.
Next year. Okay. Who else? Over here.
Môžem hovoriť aj po slovensky, keďže je to také nemoderné.
May I speak Slovak? It doesn't seem to be very modern to speak Slovak. Ďakujeme za techniku. I just would like to I would like to ask whether I can speak Slovak. It may seem to be okay, I can speak Slovak. Mr. Erickson, you as an anthropologist, you certainly know the direction in American psychology, which is called, I did not...
Behavioralism.
Oh, behavioralism. The Americans invented an approach in psychology consisting in a statistical perception of behavior of animals and humans. And the observation is that if rats has a very limited space, they start eating one another, they start to be nervous, and they stop reproducing. People are not rats, but what do you think? How many billions of people can live in the world without devouring one another, without suffering psychological distress? But it seems that nobody seems to limit population growth to a level which is economically feasible. Or let's take an example. if somebody is falling from a skyscraper, he may said when he is at the level of the 50th floor, it's still quite good. At the level of the 20th floor, well, it's not so good, but it's still not so bad. Anyway, Miss...
And maybe Miss Merkel has created Orban. Maybe what she did is that Orban is a reaction to something. I think that people wouldn't vote for Orban if there were not this problem of migration. So my question is, how many billions of people could live on the earth, and how to prevent overheating of economy? Because capitalism only wants to produce profit and exploit everything until everything is destroyed. Maybe it wouldn't be appropriate to limit population, and whether Mrs. Merkel is not the one who created Orban.
You suggest between Merkel and Orban we will discard it off this table. Otherwise, I think you might be touching upon the essence of your work.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, I mean, urban growth in the global south, I mean, it has been phenomenal. It's one of the chapters in the overheating book, in fact, is about cities and about growth of cities. But population growth is going up and down. In some parts of the world, the population is going down. In other parts, it's going up. And it's striking, isn't it, how politicians in every country want the population in their own country to increase, but everybody else should have fewer children, which shows to me the limitations of nationalism. But the answer to your question is that we human beings can be quite flexible. We can live in megacities and have good lives. We can live in Shanghai or Sao Paulo and have good lives. The real problem arises when we start to exhaust non-renewable resources, when we start to run out of water, we start to run out of phosphates, which are necessary for chemical fertilizer in order to produce food, when we reach a point where there is more plastic than fish in the oceans, and so on. That's when we're going to reach a limit. So I would say shortly that there is no absolute limit on the number of people, but there is certainly an absolute limit on the amount of resources that we can extract. So we should be worried about population growth, the way things are going. If everybody just sat still and ate a bowl of rice, we would have been fine. But as long as everybody wants their smartphone and their holiday and their electric car, we're not.
Thank you. One or two last questions. This is your opportunity before the forum closes.
Good evening. My name is Sandra, and I would like to ask you, what do you think, how much was the world slower in the year 1989, and in which ways?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question.
I could answer quickly and then you can take over. I would say that we have to keep in mind that overheating doesn't mean that everything heats up. I mean, some places cool down, sometimes involuntarily. All of a sudden, nothing happens. Nobody cares about me. And dust is settling, you know, on the factories and on the machinery and so on and so forth. So for many people, the problem is not too much speed, but too much slowness. But there was far more slowness before 1989, for example, in the realm of communication and information, of travel and mobility. I mean, traveling by plane was still very expensive in the early 1990s, when I started to go to conferences. You put on a tie. You felt that you were, you know, you would be almost treated like nobility when you entered the plane because it was expensive and rare. And now taking a plane is almost like taking a bus. So the world was slower in many ways before 1989.
How was that for you?
We are probably from the slower part of Europe, so it wasn't such a big difference. And probably still for me, the plane is not in the price of a bus. So, well, of course I feel the acceleration. Of course I know, I'm aware of this. But I cannot answer the question how much slower it is. Much slower it was. But I don't know what is the clue.
I would tell you a story. In '94, I was studying at the university, and we had an exam, and the first thing was '94. Two things: to write an email. It was before World Wide Web. To write an email and to go to the website of the Washington Capitol Library. And I was just completely unable to write and send a mail and to go to the website of the Washington Library. At the time, I wrote my poems and my short stories on typewriter. And I thought, okay, maybe I would live without emails and without internet. I could write in the future all my things with a typewriter. Why not? It was possible for me in the past, and it went 1 year or 2 years, and I couldn't imagine my life without a computer, writing emails, and to have websites, and to read books which are not in my hand. We are able to be much faster without being faster in our inside. So that would be my answer. This life were much slower, and the future is going to be much faster. But the question is how we can handle it, and we can handle it without to be destroyed through this speedness.
Yes, I mean, I realize, as Chris has also pointed out, that I've been speaking very much this evening from the sort of the level of the helicopter circling the world.
The drone, I would say.
But keep in mind that we also, as anthropologists, we also crawl around on all fours with a magnifying glass, studying the grains of sand on the beach. So we try to combine both. And so I would like to end with just a comment. I mean, inspired by these two literary persons next to me who speak more slowly and in a different register than what I usually do, and who teach us something about what it is, to be a real human being. Because, so I'd like to scale down to the level of the individual. What does overheating do to us mentally? Yes, it overheats the world and it creates a lot of problems in the world, but at the level of human psychology, what overheating does is that it fills our minds, usually with rubbish. So we lose flexibility. When something happens all the time, through media consumption, through information, through the onslaught of whatever you've got on your smartphone, then nothing really happens because you have no flexibility. So the only way you can be creative is by lying on the sofa and doing nothing. Because it's only when nothing in particular happens that anything could happen. And this is why slowness is so important.
Coming from the professor of speed, that is a beautiful thing to say.
And one more thing. At the time where electricity was invited, it took a long time in that people could use electricity in fabrics. There was something, electricity, a new way of production, but you need time to know what to do with it. Maybe internet is the same. Maybe we don't even know what to do with it. We need much more time to learn how to use it, and maybe if we are unable to learn it, it irritates us. I can imagine that that's the sort of, for example, of internet and many things which are irritating us.
Well, but if I can add something, but imagine that we are magically somehow societies that are self-governed, yes, and using the immediate democracy in a small societies, and then it really makes sense to have this kind of devices to, yes, to just creating a social life, and we are using those tools to create a social life. We are using them.
Yeah, we are.
Because it depends what it is. It depends on how we are using the thing.
Of course,
things are not using us, in
as
fact.
human beings with our own facilities. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a final question up here.
Professor Eriksson, you, in a wonderful way...
Please introduce yourself.
Yes,
to
yes.
Professor
Martin Butera from Bratislava. I'm returning to the beginning of this fascinating panel and to your talk about overheating, and imagining that you are flying in your helicopter all over the globe. Could you tell us, or could you somehow symbolically point at perhaps 3 territories, 3 regions, 3 continents, or 3 states, or 3 cities where you would like to land, or where you would like to see the mankind to land in order to do what you suggested, to slowing down, cooling down, and scaling down?
Okay, you're asking a terrible question here. So he's gonna say, I don't know, San Francisco, and then suddenly 7 billion people are gonna land in San Francisco? Okay, let's see what the answer is.
Yeah, but you know, I think, I mean, Pressburg before the First World War was not a bad place. I think where the speed was just right and the connectedness was fine. It was cosmopolitan, but people had the time to move slowly and to be thoughtful, and they could smoke a pipe, you know, and have some cognac in front of the fireplace and discuss the state of the world in a reasoned way without being too stressed. Or Oslo in the 1970s, before we found oil in the North Sea. We were doing really well. It was just right. We were just rich enough. We were a bit poorer than the Swedes, you know, so we were sort of envious of people in Sweden. And they also had glamour, you know, they had ABBA and Volvo and IKEA and stuff, and we just had a lot of fish, you know? But we were fine, we were good. And we had to look forward to things. We had to save money, you know, to buy a new stereo or a TV set, and you had to look forward to that, and maybe in a year's time you could afford it. So maybe those 2 would be 2 places. And the third place, to me, would have to be a tropical island with coconut trees, okay? where the rhythm is naturally slow because it's so hot, you know?
Yeah. Okay, this last one, we're not going to destroy it. Pressburg before First World War is over. Let's all move to Oslo 1972. Yeah? Okay, interesting. Okay, I think the Central European Forum is over for today. The main question, let's demand the impossible. It's been the most optimistic question the Forum has put forward to us in the past few years, because I noticed the past few years the titles were getting gloomier and gloomier. This time at least, let's demand the impossible. And that is what people here have been trying to do. We saw Svetlana Alexievich talking about hope against hope. We saw Krastev, Nougared, and Snyder trying to talk about creating ideals in a world where there seems to be no future. Today, Eric was here, who had to leave, unfortunately, in the meantime, to save Norway. But he was here, he faced evil in person and came out of that experience to dedicate himself to society. Then, of course, we saw the inspirational stories, experiences, and ambitions of the people who are now mobilizing tens of thousands of people on the street. And I hope, yes, next year there will be somebody from Hungary there as well. And now you took us through an accelerating world, an overheating world, which is actually, what you were saying was we should be very careful what we wish for. Yes, we could demand the impossible, but be careful about your demands, because otherwise you'll end up in a world that's gonna, because of your exciting stories, and otherwise I would have fallen backwards. I just want to thank all of you and the organization, Gabor, Božena, Thomas, very much for this.
Thank you very much.
Pretty demanding. You did really well. Right? It's demanding, but this is worthwhile.
Would you please? Something is wrong. Or just I'm unable to. Yeah, please, just for one more second. Take your headsets. I'm going to say something in Slovak.
Oh, okay.
I only want to say that when me and Andrea have come with this slogan, demand the impossible, as a slogan of this year, that was an idea which occurred to us, I don't know, a year, 10 months ago, and we were not realizing that it will be really something that applies 100% to this year event, which is a proof that it can be realistic to demand the impossible. And we were able to get this impossible only because many of you, because of our friends, volunteers who are here with us, many have helped, and many of those are here today with us. And it's also due to our interpreters. It's the best team you can find in Slovakia. And also, they have supported us and enabled us to have interpretation here. And I would also like to thank a person who sits there at the edge of the chair the whole afternoon, because he gave a sense to this, and his name is Chris Kellermans. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Andrea.
Great.